I'll call the meeting to order, our budget meeting and our budget workshop for Thursday, April 20th, 2023 at 9 a.m. Mr. Coley, can you call the roll?
Commissioner Feinbaum.
Here.
Commissioner Gibson.
Here.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Here.
Commissioner Herbert.
Here.
Commissioner Small.
Here.
And to understand, Commissioner Simpson Brown will not be here.
I'll be here.
And I'll mark Commissioner Caballero present when she arrives.
I appreciate it. All right,
You have a
y'all
quorum.
got the minutes in the mail. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved. Second.
Been moved and properly second. Ms. Coley?
Commissioner Feinbaum.
Aye.
Commissioner Gibson. Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Small.
Aye.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you. So we have a resolution today, Resolution 1475, authorizing KUB to apply for Tennessee Emergency Broadband Funds for the American Rescue Plan. I'm going to recognize Gabe to lead us through that.
Thank you, Mr. Small. Commissioners, I'd like to recognize Jamie Davis, our Vice President and Chief Technology Officer, to give you the details of this resolution.
Good morning, Commissioners. Before we kick off our budget session today, just a quick point of business. We, as you are very well aware, applied for grants from the broadband, from Tennessee Department of Economic Development. We applied for $20.4 million covering 5 counties and received earlier last year $15.3 million for 4 of those counties for Sevier, Jefferson, Granger, and Union. There's a process that you go through after award to get under contract. A lot of those contracts were not known, and the provisions of those contracts weren't known at the time of application. And as we are actually under contract now, one of those provisions was that the board acknowledged that we were allowed to apply for those grants. So it would have been nice to know that from the federal government before we applied for the grants. And being who we are, we want to be sure that we're in complete compliance. The state said there's no big deal. We're probably the only people to ever ask the question, do we really have to have a resolution? But speaking with staff and also with our legal counsel, felt that it was good belts and suspenders if we ever got audited in that regard, that we had that approval from you and that it can be granted retroactively, back to the time of application. So Resolution 1475 today really just affirms your knowledge and approval for our application for those grants. It becomes effective upon passage, and it meets the requirements of the grant contracts that we recently executed for those grants. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions? All right, can I get a motion in a second for Resolution 1475 on first and final reading?
Motion approved.
Second.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the board on this resolution? Seeing none, Mr. Coley, will you please call the roll for the vote?
Commissioner
For Resolution
Feinbaum.
1475?
Aye.
Commissioner Gibson.
I have to read the whole thing. Will you just chill? All right, no respect. I quit. I'm going back to vice chair.
My apologies.
I've changed my opinion, by the way. Now. I have a few questions.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Small.
Aye.
Resolution 1475 passes on first and final reading.
Thank you, Mr. See how I'll give you enough time to finish your statement before I go to the next thing? All right.
And he knows better than that because as lawyers, we're taught not to talk over other people talking.
Yeah, we got to send him back to lawyer school.
I know, well, he's gonna have to get a reprimand.
Poor fella.
Remember your screen.
All righty. Well, thank you, Mr. Coley. As we read that first and final reading, this is also your final meeting. So before we adjourn the board meeting and begin the budget workshop, is there any other business or comments from the commissioners? Seeing none, are there members of the public who wish to address the board? Seeing none. All right, so we will now move to adjourn this meeting, and we will now begin our budget workshop. And I'll recognize Gabe for the FY 2024 budget workshop.
Thank you, Commissioner Small. Good morning. Welcome this morning. I know this is a big meeting every year we do in April to talk about the budget. We're going to focus this particular meeting on the fiscal year 24 budget. And so we will discuss that in detail. We have a lot planned for today, a lot of discussion, a lot of questions you may have. Please feel free to jump in and ask those as you needed. and we'll gladly answer those for you as we go along. But this really focuses on our initiatives for next year, our capital plans, our projects, our O&M strategies, and so that's, we try to hit this pretty quickly, but at the same time in a lot of depth throughout this project and process. So looking forward to a big year next year. Before we begin, I want to kick off the fiscal 2023 year. We know this has been a pretty an amazing year. We had some good news in the sense that we received some pretty big awards nationally throughout the country for things we're doing well. We were able to get an award for the Community Partnership Award given to us by the Center for Energy Workforce Development. It's a national award, a really big deal for us based on our teen work program, one we've been really proud of for 27, 28 years now. We got the Supernova, I think that's the coolest name ever, Supernova Star Award for being energy efficiency, given to us by the Alliance for Safe Energy, another national award we received in Washington, D.C. And we also got the APGA, which is the American Public Gas Association's Energy Efficiency, Environmental Efficiency Award. So those are pretty big deals for us. They are not your normal routine awards, and to speak to what we're doing just on a national level with our utilities. And you'll hear about some other awards throughout the day from us that we received. And as you all know too, the flip side of that is inflation's really hitting us hard. There are a lot of things that we have to purchase and have to do, and those prices have climbed significantly. Labor market is tight, inflation of just wages, but just finding people, and in contractors has been tough. And we'll talk about that a lot today. You'll hear a lot about that in the next few months also. It's something we've got to just figure out and tackle. Good news also, we launched our community solar program project on Monday. That was a big deal, a beautiful day out there. The mayor and the TVA folks were there celebrating our first community solar project. So we're very, very excited about that, something we've been talking about for years. It's finally happening. 1 megawatt site, and I will say as of today, 45% of it's already been subscribed within just 3 days. And so very, very excited about that. We hope it sells out, and looking forward to getting that publicized throughout the area. December 23rd, we all remember it well, at least I do, at least personally. We had our first curtailment in the history of KUB/TVA. And I thought our folks did a phenomenal job preparing, it happens quickly, and we reacted even faster. And we're able to keep that to a minimum as far as outages and communications to our folks was phenomenal to make sure they knew what was going on over those 2 days. And hope we never see it again, but we learned a lot from that, and I really appreciate those folks who stepped into that role that weekend. We have also applied for grants. You'll hear that a lot. Jamie just talked about the $15.4 million, but we've applied for over almost $170 million in grants. The federal government, state have allocated money for different utilities, and we're applying like crazy and trying to get our best foot forward. We've already been awarded $40.3 million of that, which is exciting. More to come. A lot of details to be worked out. A lot of stuff we still don't know about them yet. Also, but that's part of all the acts that have been passed to get those funding started. Last year's initiatives, we had 3 last year. One was to launch the fiber division. It is launched. So we checked that one. We got a lot of work to be done, but that was really our goal, to get it off the ground and customers served. And we're very, very tickled by that. Continue our Century 2 investments. That's kind of an ongoing thing. We have some large projects. The largest in KUB's history has begun, which is our filters project at MBW. Kurt will talk about that a little bit more today, but it's that project has begun. And it really makes our plant really resilient, really reliable, and allows us to have a future for water for way past us. And then lastly, on that initiative from last year, diversity, equity, inclusion. Very, very important to me, very important to our company, very important to our folks at this company. All 1,150 people that work here want to feel like they belong at this company and belong in this community. And we want to keep having those conversations about those things and having that deep dive into what it means to everybody to feel that way. And so Tanisha Baker and her folks have done a great job this last year, really just giving us a lot of training, a lot of education, a lot of conversations. And it was a great first year, but that's one of those things you do for forever per se, and continue to have that conversation. So more of that to come this next year. And then, as you know, we rolled out the blueprint this past fall, kind of updated version of the blueprint. Great conversations, great input from you as the board, but also just want to make sure that that's really important to us. And as you'll see, that's the blueprint again from this, as you remember. We talk about our vision and mission, very, very clear. We want to make sure we create connections, we enhance the quality of life, and we do it with industry-leading utility services, all 5 of them. And in summary, we do that by our 12 values. And those values are broken into customers, community, culture, and coworkers. And so there's 12 values. We talk about one a month. That was kind of my goal, is to go out and just talk about one a month and deep dive. A good example is this month, April 22nd is Earth Day, this coming Saturday. And environmental stewardship kind of hits the nail on the head there. So under community, you'll see we are committed to a cleaner environment. What does that mean? It's the things we do efficiently, the fuels we use, the processes we use, the energy we save. The community solar, great point this past Monday. And we have those conversations about what does that, that simple statement means to us is very profound. And so we'll do that every month for the next year, and then we'll probably repeat again and do it again. But just to kind of drive home what those values mean to us as we act throughout our stewardship every day. So here's next year's strategic initiatives. Looking ahead, continue to grow the fiber division. We talked about the grants. A big part of the construction is getting those folks in Union and Granger County served with that grant money that has a timeline on it. Those are also the folks that have no access to anything. So it kind of meets those needs, and we're excited about that project underway. We want to get to about almost 14,000 customers by the end of next fiscal year. That's a pretty big jump, because we just started a few months ago. But we think that the need is there. Jamie will talk about that a lot today, about as far as the excitement's there, folks want it, and the success we've had so far. And then really the last one there is to really get our low-income program started, the pilot begun. That was one of our cornerstones of this, was to make sure we have access for low-income folks, especially with those in school, to have access to those fiber we have. And so that's really begun here. It begins shortly this summer with our pilot, begin with the folks at Austin East in that community school. So looking forward to that. The middle column there is investing in a high-functioning organizational culture. Once again, blueprint, talk about it a lot. We've now got it up on all the walls pretty much at KUB. We've got it on cards, but it's more than just that. It's a conversation about those things. Continuing to do those things that really drive home what we're about. Leadership development. We've had a lot of retirements the last 2 or 3 years. Ever since COVID, retirements have picked up at a very good pace, I guess to say. A lot of folks who've been here for 30, 40 years have gone to enjoy their second term and fun that they want to enjoy after working here so long. So we have a lot of new folks, and we want to make sure we train those folks, equip them with the tools they need, and have them prepared for that next generation of growth throughout KUB system. And then continuing our DEI strategy and outreach. Like I said, we had a great first year with Tanisha and her folks, but that's just the beginning. I think there's a lot to be had, a lot of things we want to do beyond that, and so I'm looking forward to that next year of education with that. Then last but not least, but very important this next few months, is developing an inflation response plan. That's what we're calling it. I wish inflation would go away. I wish supply chain would get better. I just don't think it's going to. We've got to develop a plan. How can we sustain the plans we had laid out with the funds we have? So a lot of hard conversations will be had these next few months on what can we do to trim back on some things or slow down some things, at the same time maintain that high quality service we have. How do we look at long-term funding strategies? If this sustains for very long, the money we have won't go as far as it used to. And so we have those conversations on that, while also maintaining the lowest bills we can for our customers. So it's that delicate balance we have to do every time. And so we got a lot of hard conversations over these next few months. And you all will be involved in workshops that will allow you to ask all the questions we're asking ourselves to make sure we have a good plan coming next year. And then, as we mentioned earlier, we're going to pursue all the federal funding. We got the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the American Recovery Plan, the Inflation Reduction Act, all those acronyms you hear. There's a lot of funds out there, and they're still early. We're going to go after them pretty hard. We've got teams focused on that just to see what it takes to get those funds. And so that'll help the plan if we can get them, but that's out there for another year or so before we know some of that comes to fruition. So very important that we balance everything we can to keep our system strong. So looking ahead, also just look at this year's plan. It's a $1.2 billion budget. You'll hear that in some detail today. And it is an increase of $73 million, a 6% increase from last year. Big driver of that is the cost of just doing business, the cost of goods. Our O&M's up 20%, $20 million, not 20%, $20 million from last year. And that's just maintaining what we've been doing. Nothing new really that we can say about that. We do have $85 million in new bonds to help fund those programs and projects, and so you'll hear about that from Mark. We are not asking for any additional rate increases or changes to the approved rate increases that we've already approved as a board. So it's a 5% water increase in July, a 4% wastewater increase in July, and a 3% electric increase next year. We are not asking for additional funds there, with conversations to be had next year how it looks going forward as far as those rates and borrowing debt, all those things we try to leverage to make our system strong. So a lot to be covered today, a little bit of an agenda. We'll have John Gresham, our Vice President of Operations, talk about the electric and natural gas systems in detail. We'll then have him followed up by Kurt Stafford, our Director of Engineering, talk about the water and wastewater systems. We can take a break, and of course, if you need a break anytime during the presentations, you can get up and do that. But that'll be a hard break there if we want to have that to stretch the legs and whatnot. We'll then proceed with Mr. Jamie Davis, our Chief Technology Officer, doing the fiber update. And then Mark is our closer, as always, to do the financials of how we pay for this, fund it, keep it going. Celeste's favorite part of the presentation, so she'll have all the questions saved till the end for the tough ones. No, all morning. So with that being said, I'll turn over to John to get us kicked off.
Thank you, Gabe. Good morning, Commissioner. I almost prefer to stand up and talk, but animated.
I'm sorry. You can stand up, seriously.
Microphone on here. So yeah, as Gabe said, we're going to touch on the highlights, Kurt and I and Jamie, with our utility systems, both capital and O&M budgets there. We're going to touch on some of the impacts of inflation and supply chain as well that we've been facing. So let's go ahead and dive into the electric side of the house. So you all have seen this map before. It helps us calibrate just a little bit. As a reminder, we'll do this for each utility, but the electric system has about 215,000 customers across about 700 square miles-ish there, about 5,500 miles of line that we maintain. You can see the breakout of the types there. We've got distribution, which is overhead and underground, and then a little bit of transmission that we move electricity around our system. 9 in-feed stations, those are the delivery points from the Tennessee Valley Authority. We've actually got our 10th station of that type in construction now, and we'll talk about that a little bit. We've got 63 distribution substations, which are the black dots on the map there, that serve our customers. And you can see our capacity there and our demands, which we've got ample capacity in our system. I will say that as we move into this, our focal points typically for electric are service reliability, a big focus for us. System resiliency we'll be talking about a little bit. For us to be able to maintain our system, we need the ability to move things around. And then lastly, we're looking to leveraging the fiber investment. And all that connectivity stuff's really neat for Jamie, but on my side of the house, it's about leveraging that technology for operations and improving service reliability. So we're real excited about that. So those are our focal points. So the electric budget for next year looks like this: about $150 million on the capital improvement side. About $81 million of that is for fiber, and Mr. Davis will talk about that later this morning. And then we've got about $86 million invested in operations and maintenance programs that we run. And you can see the assets we're going to focus on today is our investments in our substations, our transmission system, the distribution system, and then those maintenance programs. So you get your first glimpse there, the upper right, that is the Western Avenue substation. It's under construction, so you can see that there. And then the bottom picture is one of our new line worker apprentices, Amber Ray, climbing up through some substation lattice. So not exactly sure what she's doing there, but she looks really happy. So let's dive right into the substation projects. As we've talked about, we do have that Western Avenue infeed point. Yes, sir.
Are we gonna do questions? You want us to?
You can fire away.
If you go back to the next one, when you say, I just wanted for clarification. When you say 81.3 for fiber, you're talking about for the deployment of fiber and not the fiber division, right?
Yes.
And so I just wanted to make that clear, so when folks see that, they'll understand that it's for the deployment of fiber.
Yes. Yeah. Good question. Thank you. So there on the right, you see a better picture of that construction site as it's happening there. But we do have the Western Avenue station that's really going to help us. That's about $17.5 million investment in total, with just under $1 million of that in the next fiscal year to finish that project. So we plan to have this station in service by the fall of this calendar year. and it's working closely with TVA. Beneficially, where this really helps is it's going to add capacity. So you saw our system capacity is about 3,000 megawatts currently. This will move it to almost 3,400 when we're done, and it really adds primarily some system reliability for us so we can take other assets out in the future for refurbishment and other things. This is a big win for us. The station itself will be comprised of 2 power transformers. So you see a picture of one of those transformers there at the bottom. That's actually a shop in South Korea. And that transformer is currently being tested right there. I think it's in transit now, expected to be here in the next maybe 30, 60 days. But there'll be 2 of those at this station, 14 substation breakers, if you remember what those were in the past. A lot of steel structure, a control house with a lot of automation and control in it. And then the distribution circuits will be built out of there to actually serve our customers. So a lot to be done this summer. Most of the equipment's already here and we're ready to go. We also have a couple of what I would say are more routine substation upgrade projects now, our Century 2 refurbishment program. So there's 2 stations scheduled for next year. One of those is the Fair Drive substation in the Fountain City area. We'll refurbish that thing. And then the other one is the Ellistown substation that's in East Knox County. And that project's not only a refurbishment, but it's also, we're going to increase some capacity there with a larger transformer to help serve that community. So those projects will be underway. A critical point as we start moving into some of the impact of inflation and supply chain are our substation transformers. So we plan to buy 2 new substation transformers next year. One of those to go into the Ellistown station, and the other is a spare. We had to use our existing spare this past year to replace a transformer that had an issue. So we're purchasing another one of those. So these units run from $1 to $2 million. And so we actually deferred a unit that was planned for this year. We moved it out of the plan because of the inflationary constraints, and it's in the back end of the plan now. But to give you a good example, power transformers are up almost 45% cost-wise. Typically, lead times on those units were about 9 months, and they're moving months. So a great example is for Western Avenue, the 2 units we're buying. One came from South Korea, one's coming from China. They cost in total about $3.2 million, and it's going to take, by the time they get here, about 14 months for delivery. So big impacts with what we're doing there. So any questions on substations?
Is there a possibility of any kind of domestic sourcing for any of those?
Yeah, historically, we do supply these domestically, but because of the supply chain issues, that's just not been feasible for us. We actually had to sort of change some procurement rules and the way we approach things, even defined availability in the 2 got. So I think domestically, it's just, there's a high demand for that and low supply, and we just weren't able to do that. But typically, that's what we do, is buy those domestically.
I'm sorry, Kathy.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask, I mean, you addressed the fact that Western Avenue is adding capacity. I'm just, since we're talking about the supply chain constraints, I'm just wondering, with the growth that we're experiencing here in Knox County, do you see any concerns about, over the next couple of years, what challenges we may have regarding the system? I mean, can we continue to handle the growth that we're seeing?
Yes.
With these supply chain constraints that we're also experiencing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we could probably talk about that for quite at length here today. I won't do that, but to be brief, yes, our system, the way it's designed and the way it's operated, has ample capacity. So on the first map slide there, you saw we have about 3,000 megawatts of capability within our system, but our highest peaks are significantly lower than that. So our system's really designed only to load our substations and load our feeders at about 50%. So we have a lot of bandwidth there. Now, the flip side of that, and where we're living today, and it is inflationary constraints, cost is a big deal, but it's really the supply chain. So we're having to be very careful because materials are trickling in. So we're used to getting a shipment of say, 100 power poles. They would come in once a month regularly. Now we're dealing with 6 and 7. When can we get them? when will they be here? What truck is that on? Where's it at? And our procurement group's doing a really great job keeping a very close eye on our material levels as well as those suppliers that provide for us. So it's a little more on that side. If I was to say, we're just having to be careful and concerned, but I think future growth, I think we're set up for success there. So hopefully we'll ride this out. But great question.
I'll add to that, transformers and poles would be that's the single phase, the things you put on your houses, and your houses are the issue. And this last storm that came through a couple weeks ago that hit the whole state of Tennessee, I got an email from a utility in Rockwood saying, I just need transformers. Do you have any spares? Now, we're nowhere near that, but we're seeing, it's just showing you how hard things are to get. And so it really puts an onus on our procurement folks to say, okay, allocate, hold, store, use only when needed. And so that's just the reality we're in right now. Will it get better? Hopefully. But the growth in this country and not in this area is just, it's compounding the issue. And, I think we have a great plan. It's just a lot going on. So.
Yeah, we've had Y12 call us and ask us for poles. It's been just a long list of everybody struggling with supply chain.
So with those supply chain issues, are we then forecasting out what we'll need in the future? And if it's taking 14 months, are we ordering out enough time to get them if we'll need them in a year or two?
Yeah, we're looking. A great example of that's in our transportation fleet, for example. We're having trouble getting vehicles, and we're now into year 3. We're already getting requisitions and getting orders in and getting in line for 3 years out just to get a pickup truck. So, yeah, we're trying to stay as ahead of the game as we feasibly can. Okay, moving to our 69 kV sub-transmission projects here. This, our 69 system is what moves power from the TVA delivery points out into the system. It's the backbone of our system. It's very critical. We've got about 270 miles of this out in the system, and we're working on refurbishing this for quite a while. So this system's a little different. Most of the poles are steel. And they're taller than what you typically see out in our distribution system. And I'll let you do the math, but that means it's more expensive, right? So we do have plans to upgrade 9 additional miles this year. And I apologize, that map's a little hard to see. It's those yellow lines there is where we're actually working. So the circles are substations, and the lines, the actual electrical facility. So we're doing upgrades in the Fountain City area, Luttrell, and Mascot to do that plan. Now, typically we do about 15 miles of upgrades a year, but because of some of the inflationary constraints and some minor tweaks to the substation refurbishment project, we've downgraded that to 9 miles this year. As a reminder, as we do this refurbishment, we are adding fiber on those lines as well, connecting our substations together and getting ready for some of the future technologies that are coming. So that's going to be really helpful for us. And at the end of the day, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but the inflationary constraints here, those steel poles have gone up by almost 80%. And so, for instance, one of those poles cost about $15,000 to purchase, and we're going to do about 96 of them next fiscal year. So significant impacts to that. The wire itself's up about 22%, and again, we're having to be careful with the supply chain and ordering those poles in advance, and then we're experiencing some extended lead times in this area as well. Any questions on our transmission system? Okay. So our distribution system, this is our lifeblood here. So we've got about just over 5,000 miles of line out there across our system. It's both overhead and underground construction. It's hundreds of thousands of assets. So it's made up of poles, wires, transformers, meters, switches, all the assets you can imagine there. So we've got lots of programs that we utilize to keep that system running, and some of those examples are just on the left of the slide there. So pole replacements, we plan on doing about 1,400 of those next year at about $4.5 million. Now, typically, we plan to do 2,600 poles a year. Over the past few years, this is an area where we've been helping the budget out by cutting a little bit. So I would say as we move into the inflationary planning, this is an area we're going to have to talk about. Is that rate really sustainable, or do we need to get it back more towards the 2,600 that we're doing? So it means a lot to reliability there. The second program is our cable replacement program. You've likely heard about this in the past. That chart on the right is a great message. We've been working on getting our direct buried, so we just take the cable, put it in the dirt. XLP cables, they're prone to failure. They're life cycling out. And we've been at this since the early 2000s. We're here at the end now, so we're going to replace about 4 miles of this cable next year. We have 5 miles left, so the final year will be done in 2025, and we'll have that asset class out of our system. Now, we're not done, so what will happen after that is we've got about 70 more miles of different types of cable that is direct buried that will begin that replacement program thereafter. So that's being evaluated and constructed now and continuous moving forward. And to make you feel better, when we put cable in the ground now, it's installed in conduit, and that conduit helps extend the life of that cable, gets it out of the elements, and then when it's time to replace that or there's a failure, it makes it a lot simpler and a lot more cost-effective to pull that wire out of the conduit and push another one in, if that makes sense. So we don't direct bury anymore.
And so we have the poles, we're doing 1,400 a year. These are the wood poles, correct?
Yeah, mostly the wood
How
poles.
many do we have total in the system?
About 220,000 poles.
Yeah, we own
total.
about 140,000 of those. The
Yeah.
other ones are owned by AT&T, but
Yeah.
we own 140,000 poles, but we're attached to over 200,000. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
and they're
it's-
predominantly the wood.
Yeah.
And they have about a 50-year shelf life, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Are there any developments in terms of materials that maybe give them a longer shelf life in terms of those kinds of poles?
Yeah, we've gone through iterations of concrete poles and other types of poles, but wood's really the technology that most folks lean to now.
And the cost differential is so
trailers,
great
yeah.
on the metal poles that, it's one of those, we do put them in key circuits, like a main distribution line, like a Kingston Pike. Those are all steel.
Yeah.
Because it's a main line that really feeds a lot of area. But when you look at the cost difference, even with wood poles going up, steel poles are even more of a big inflationary act. So unfortunately, there's not been the secret material we found that got the best of both worlds, but we're trying.
Distribution transformers, these are the gray cans you see hanging on the poles, or the little green boxes you see in your subdivision, right? And we have about 80,000 of those out there on our system. And they get replaced through life cycle, lifing out, line jobs, new extensions to serve customers. So we're in that space and pretty busy. So we've got about $6.5 million there scheduled to purchase about 1,200 units next year as part of our business. And then lastly, our 13 kV line projects. We do these for road relocations, service reliability improvements, extensions to serve new customers, so various reasons. So we have a lot of projects there, about $6.5 million. So we've got a TDOT-driven road relocation in the Beaver Creek area into the Powell community. For instance, we've got the Ellistown substation. We talked about the capacity growth with the transformer. Well, you've got to uprate the lines as well to move that capacity out into the community. So we've got some line work out in that community to do. And then we've got some system reliability initiatives in Kodak and Seymour, East Knoxville, and seemed like there was one more. Seymour and South Knox, yeah. So again, transformer costs have gone up on average about 28%. So transformers can run from a few $100s to $10,000 to $12,000. So we did have one class of larger pad mount transformer that went from like $4,000 typical expense to like $12,000 almost overnight. And that's the kind of things we're seeing in this space. Pole costs, those wooden pole costs are up about 29%. And we did take one action. We did reduce one contract construction crew for next year to save some money in the budget as well. Questions? Okay. So switching gears on you a little bit, as Mr. Davis builds out the fiber system, we are trying to take advantage of that. And so this automation we're looking at, and this is going to be a mouthful though, so it's our fault, location, isolation, and service restoration program, right? FLISR, right? You may have heard of them as the smart switches that are out there. So that program's underway. We've been in this business since about 2017. But when fiber became available, we pivoted on the technology to the fiberized equipment, and that's what we're doing now. So this current fiscal year, we just completed our pilot installation of the first handful of these devices in the Mohawk area near our water plant, which is where fiber started. And we're now in full deployment, so we'll install about 50 additional units through the remainder of this fiscal year. And then next fiscal year, we plan to install an additional 144 units. So when we're done with that, we'll have about, counting our legacy units, about 300 of these devices out in the field, operating and serving our customers. So in a nutshell, what these do are that we place them out there at about 200 customer increments. They talk to each other, they sense faults, and they basically isolate the impact of that to the smallest number of customers possible. And we've been real happy with it since 2018. We've saved over 10 million minutes of customer interruption, and that's just with the small number of units we've got out there. So we see this as a very positive, favorable thing for us. Now, again, the impacts of that is our recloser supplier has already notified us that we're going to see a 10% increase in cost on those devices. When we started, they cost about $34,000 a piece. So that's about a $3,500 increase, and I'll let you do the math, times 1,000, that's a big number that we're having to deal with. And then there's a lot of materials here. This thing got a pointer. So here's the actual switch, but we've got other switches so we can bypass this unit. We put in a new pole, as you can see here, to support that. Those costs are about up 8% as well. And then also our manufacturers, we're on a weekly call with them talking about when can we get our next 5 units. So a lot of extended supply chain stuff that we're dealing with.
So since these switches follow fiber, right? Because they're fiber.
They're falling just behind where fiber
okay.
deploys.
Okay. That was my question. So then those will be available where fiber is deployed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if I probably should have put that map on here, but Jamie will show you some maps here in a bit, and we'll be right behind that. So I think we're heading now to Arlington, Park City. It seems like there's another. I'm forgetting Jamie, but we're right behind where they are. Fair Drive, yeah, thank you, Andrew. The Fair Drive there, so it's going quite well. The engineering group was telling me we're kind of getting in a pretty solid groove now in construction and getting these in pretty effectively. And our overhead group's helping us. They're getting out, locating the poles, getting the poles ready even in advance of the units even getting here. So we're getting them in pretty quickly now. So we're looking forward to that. I would be remiss because I've spent most of my life on this side of the house in terms of maintenance. So we talked about the capital improvement. We've talked about our asset renewal programs, the highlights of that, but we also invest heavily in maintenance. And we do this to extend the life cycle of our assets to save our customers money. And we do it to make sure these assets function as we need them to function. So a lot of them are safety gear. And some of them, like a substation breaker, can sit there for months not operating, but you want it to operate when it's called upon. So we've got some great programs. We don't have time today to talk through all of them, so I tried to get some examples related to our substations in particular, since that's such a critical asset. So you can see the assets there at the top. You can see the programs and kind of the rotation we have there. I'll walk you through these pictures. That colorful picture there, you may have seen that in the past. That's actually an image from our thermography program, where we're able to use infrared technologies to detect hotspots in electrical equipment. So we scan all of our substations are scanned every single year. We've been doing that for decades now, so we've got a great baseline of information. So we see anomalies very quickly, and it allows our crews to get in there, fix that anomaly before it becomes an unplanned outage. So this is a great program. It's really helped us over the years. And we do that thermography on way more than just the electric system. We use it at our plants and other places too. So this is just a substation example. But the lower picture on the right there, that's one of our technicians taking an oil sample from one of our substation transformers. So those devices are filled with oil that's used as an insulating and a cooling material. But what happens is if that device begins to have an internal problem, gases build up in the unit. That gas gets in the oil. We're able to send this oil off to a laboratory. They analyze it, and we have been able to build a baseline, and we can recognize when problems are developing and growing. And again, when we see that, we're able to take that device offline and prevent what could be a catastrophic failure. There's a lot of energy in those devices. And we take those oil samples from every single transformer twice a year. And it really helps us in our predictive world. And then lastly, the big picture is just a quick shot of just some regular PM work. So the technician on the top of that transformer is likely looking at the bushings and the connections up there to make sure everything's tight. And then the technician on the ground's looking inside the control cabinet that has some mechanical and electrical control parts in it. And we go through our entire substation fleet. They touch everything in the substations on about a four-year cycle, I believe it is. So this is performed by KUB technicians. It's performed by some contract services. And we use a lot of technology. So the impact here is we're starting to see those contracted service costs go up as well. So questions on maintenance? Okay. One last maintenance program that's very important to us. You hear about this a lot. It's our vegetation management program. And as you know, about 60% of our customer minutes of interruptions are attributed to vegetation. So this is a big deal for us. Fiscal year 24 is a milestone year for us. There's $15.5 million in the budget, which has allowed us to achieve 1,000 miles of annual trimming. And that's a place we've really wanted to get back to for a long time. You can see the programs we use to manage that. So 50 miles of transmission trimming a year, 950 miles of distribution work done. We do have a hazardous tree removal program, which has been really helpful. Our internal foresters, as they're planning work out on the system, they look outside of our maintenance zone and they look for trees that are imminent hazards to our assets, and they work with the property owners to get those trees removed to prevent future outages like that picture. So this is March of this year, one of our recent storms. That's a tree that was clearly across the street from our facilities. That is a single tree, if you can believe that, and it looks like it exploded. And it's leaning against our facilities. This caused a breaker outage, probably impacted 1,000 customers. So what has to happen is, and you see this $2 million for storm response, a tree crew will have to go out here, clean all of this up before our construction crews can get here and repair and restore electricity. Yes, ma'am.
So when you say our tree teams go out and talk to customers, are we cutting those trees for them, or are we convincing them that they need to go find someone to cut the trees for them?
We typically will trim those trees or remove that tree for them. It's because we see it as an imminent impact to our facilities. Now, occasionally, we'll work with them. They'll do some work, we'll do some work, but it's usually us doing most of that removal.
Even if it's not in our line? Okay.
Yes.
I'll remind you that all the trees that we trim are actually really customer trees.
Right.
So, yeah, it's something we do for reliability purposes.
And there are two different budgets. One of them is just maintenance that we do around our lines, and the other one in the hazardous tree removal is outside of that scope, and like the tree that fell.
Yeah, we will step outside of the maintenance zone for the hazardous removal.
Is there a way for folks to contact KUB to say, hey, I think this tree is a problem. Can you go? Okay.
Yeah, we get those
we get that
calls a
call
lot,
daily.
and,
Yeah.
and we will go out and visit, and that's when we make the decision of.
You know, I don't think I knew that, because one of the trees that fell, that I was actually displaced, and you talked about that, and I knew that tree. I didn't realize I could call KUB.
Yeah.
And just say, hey, look at it.
No,
It's my
now
neighbor's
we'll look
property.
at it, we'll assess it. You know, we don't always say we're gonna remove it for you, so it depends on how hazardous it is to our assets before we make that decision. And honestly, 1,800 trees is a drop in the budget compared to the, urban canopy here, so we're very careful with what we designate as a hazardous tree. And our issues here is, while we've got internal foresters, most of the trimming work, or virtually all the trimming work, is performed by contract labor, and the vegetation management space is highly competitive nationally. So even before the inflation things we're seeing now and before COVID, we were having issues not only obtaining crews to do this trimming, but figuring out how to deal with the rising costs. So we've done a lot of things over the past 5 years to keep costs steady, and that's served us well recently. But I will say, last fiscal year, we saw about a 13% increase in that contract labor, and we expect to see that again this year. So we're being impacted there as well. So closing up the electric, I'm dragging a little long here, but again, it's about reliability, it's about resiliency, and I hope you can see here that we continue to invest in the appropriate programs next year while we figure out what the impact of inflation is, and we're doing that through our capital investments, our asset renewal programs, our maintenance, and then leveraging modernization. As you can see on the right side, we like to end with those good messages. We still are very heavily involved in the industry. We have maintained the American Public Power Association RP3 rating at its highest level We've been a member of Tree USA successfully for 20-plus years, so we're still very engaged. So, any questions on the electric work for next year?
What does it mean to be part of these groups? Like, is it training for our folks, or is it standards we maintain? Is it?
Yeah, all the above. The RP3 is more about them vetting the various processes we do, like workforce development and reliability and community outreach. It's kind of holistic. It's best practice. The Tree Line USA keeps us, focused on the health of the tree. And we get a lot of standards there. We get the input on standards when things come up, questions. So it's kind of across the board. It's just good for us. And you'll hear that in each utility. Okay, so let's pivot then quickly to the natural gas area and calibrate. So you've seen this map as well again. So you see 108,000 gas services there, about 300 square miles, which is basically Knox County. We have about 2,600 miles of pipe out there, mostly our distribution, but we're a distributor only, right? So we take gas off the natural gas pipeline at these three locations. So we call those our city gate stations. And then we move that gas at what we call our higher pressure system. So that's mostly steel pipe. And then we move that from these black dots, or our 46 pressure regulation devices. And then we move it out. I know that's hard to see, but this light orange shading here is the rest of our distribution system, which is predominantly plastic, right? So you can see here one interesting point of note for gas is in December of last year, we did set a new system peak at 169,000 decatherms, which is about a 21% increase over the previous peak we had. And we attribute that mostly to residential growth, coupled with the sustained cold outages of December, and then maybe sprinkled with the rotating outages from TVA. I think everybody turned on their gas fire logs when that started occurring, and so that ended up being here. So the focal points for gas haven't changed much. It's really about system integrity. It's about system resiliency. System integrity is keeping gas in the pipe. System resiliency is making sure we can serve our customers, safety, and then growth. So let's get into this a little bit. So here's what the investments look like in the natural gas world for next year: $28.7 million in the capital improvements and $27.6 in the O&M programs. And we'll focus on our high pressure steel system, our stations and equipment, which are very important to us to operate the system, our distribution plastic system, maintenance programs, and then growth. So looking at our higher pressure system, this is the red pipe, which you can see moves gas around our system here. There's about 76 miles of this pipe out there, mostly predominantly steel. We have two major projects in this world next year. The Level Road project, which is currently under construction and will finish up next year. That's a move ahead project because TDOT's going to widen and relocate Level Road. So we're doing our work up ahead of that. This is about an $8 million project in total, with 1.7 of that being expended next year to finish that project. It's about 2 miles of 16-inch pipe. Currently we have 12-inch pipe there, so we're going to upgrade that to 16-inch to add some capacity since west, and you can see where the project is here, is heavily, a lot of our gas flows west. This is a nice project from a resiliency standpoint. I know it's hard to see on this map, but we're actually moving away from Level Road to avoid future road work and all the excavation that's going to occur as that road widens. We're going to avoid any dig-ins by moving off the main path there, so we feel pretty good about that. The second project, which you can see here, and this is a solid line portion, that's what we're going to do next year, and then this dashed green line is what we'll finish up in fiscal year 2025, is what we're calling the East Bridge Loop. And this thing's going to help us with resiliency, reliability, and maybe even some growth out in that area. So we're going to extend about, what I say here, 3 miles of pipe next year for $2.6 million there. Yeah, 3 miles, sorry about that. And ultimately what this is going to do is create a loop. And you've got to remember, we've got the East Bridge Industrial Park up there, and we've got the Midway Industrial Park. So it's really important that we have that resiliency in our system. So we're going to invest in that there. One nice thing here is we're able to use high-density polyethylene pipe. That's a mouthful, but we're gonna make that plastic instead of steel, and that saves us some dollars as we build this out. In addition to putting this pipe in, there will be 2 regulator stations eventually built next year. There'll be one here that's gonna take this 200 pounds of pressure, drop it to 125 to allow us to use that plastic pipe. And then you'll have another station up here that drops that to the 60-pound distribution pressure. So we'll have 2 new stations as we build that out. As I said, our stations are very important to us. So we've got the 3 gate stations where we take gas, and we've got the 40-plus regulator stations out there. And they're important because they control pressure. And it lets us operate our system very safely. So while these dollars don't look significant, the work is very critical, and that's why it's made this slide. So we've got one project at our top side gate station. So if you've gone on a tour with me on your orientation, that's the station we go to. And recently you would have seen a lot of work there. But we've got a metering capacity increase happening here, which is ultimately going to let us flow 50% more gas through that station. And that's a big deal because Level Road flows most of our gas. And if it was to have an issue, we had constraints. This is going to take care of that. We're able to move gas around our system. So we're going to be real happy with that. In addition to that, we have 3 regular Century 2 regulator station upgrade projects next year. Harris Road, which is in East Knox County near Rutledge Pike. Cherokee Trail, which is just, I guess, southwest of town. And then the West Bridge Station, which is in the Carnes area near the West Bridge Industrial Park, are all going to be refurbished. And West Bridge is actually going to get connected to our SCADA monitoring system. We don't have eyes on it now, so we're going to connect it in, which is a good thing for us. And then I've already mentioned the 2 regulator stations that we'll be adding as a part of the East Bridge Loop. The distribution system, again, we get about 2,500 miles of pipe, predominantly plastic. But we do have some steel out there. So we've got about 30 miles of steel distribution main remaining in our system. We're going to replace 8 miles of that next fiscal year, which is a good deal. So we're heading towards the end. Since 2017, we've removed over 50 miles of that pipe. And that's important to us because it's coupled steel, which is a mechanical connection. And it's beginning to age out, and it's a potential leak driver for our system. So we want to get it out, and we're well on our way doing that. You can see the projects here are here. And the one to note is the Broadacres subdivision in Powell. That's a humongous subdivision and got a lot of steel pipe in it, so about 3.5 miles of work there.
So the plan is to get rid of all steel or just
On the
steel?
distribution system.
On the distribution,
Yeah.
so the intakes will still be steel, right? We get them in from the, okay.
Yeah, the pressure's mandated to be steel, so yeah, that's gonna stay there. Resiliency is also a big deal for us. So about the last decade, we've been working on this project a bit at a time. So these red boxes, there's 7 projects slated, and this is basically looping our system where those opportunities exist. So our goal in this area is to make sure that no single point of failure, so a third-party dig-in, let's say, impacts more than 200 customers. Does that make sense? So we're trying to drive that number down, drive that impact down by creating these loops. This is neat work too, because our KUB construction crews typically do that work and do a good job. So we, a couple of these are Cedar Crest and Bakertown where we're working there.
Can I ask a question about the loops?
Yes.
So if one side, so loop, circle, whatever, sort of, right? So if someone north of, on the loop digs something and you have to close down for emergency, that means that all the rest of the customers can get,
Gas will flow
gas
back
from
around
the
the other
other-
way.
Okay.
Yeah, where we'll be able to valve it out and gas will still make it right back to that same closed valve, just by a different path. And we do this by looking out, so you'll have a subdivision built here and a subdivision built here. You see a small gap, we just put a piece of pipe there, connect them together, and we feel a lot better about serving our customers. So yeah, it works nicely. And then lastly, road relocations. I think you've heard this many times in the past. They really have a significant impact on our annual budget. Next year's no different to that. So you've already heard me mention the Level Road relocation, but we got 3 other primary ones there at Chapman Highway, Pleasant Ridge, and Canton Hollow that we're gonna have to deal with next year as well and move some of our facilities out of the way.
do we cover all the expenses of when someone relocates a road? Like we have to cover all the expenses of that, even if it's not our plan or our idea?
Yeah, I know, that's probably a better question for engineering or somebody. I know occasionally we get reimbursed and then sometimes we do not get reimbursed.
Yeah, it depends on if it's a state funded project, they typically give you some reimbursement. If it's a local, like a city of Knoxville, city of Town of Farragut, or Knox County, it is not. So depending on who's driving it, so it's and in any federal job, which is rare, like an interstate, that's definitely funded, but those have been far and few between because we're not usually on interstates. So
Yeah, great question. And again, maintenance program is my favorite. So we've got lots of them in the gas system. What happens here is it's a highly regulated industry, a little different than electric. So we have minimum standards we have to meet with patrolling our system and monitoring our system. And while those programs are regulatory, KUB subscribes to they are the right things to do. So we're all in here. We support this, and you see some examples of those programs there on the list. So we do proactive leak surveys, and we do our technicians. We got 4 technicians that are dedicated to doing this work every single day. They do about 40,000 inspections a year on about a 3-year cycle to get all across our system. So you can see there's a lot of walking. So we have these Segway units that they can use. So he'll actually drive from the meter to the road, checking for gas. And then we have these devices here, which are mounted on trucks, which are able to detect the gas as well and allow us to drive down roads and through subdivisions doing that same work. So very labor intensive. They cover a lot of ground every single day doing this work. In addition to that, we own about 23,000 valves out on the gas system, and we take a look at 4,500 of those a year, maintaining those. We have a dedicated KUB crew that does that. And we do that because, first off, we want to be able to locate those valves. You'd be surprised how many get paved over and other things happen. So it allows us to locate them effectively when we need to, and then to make sure that device works when we need it. So when we do close that valve to address a problem, it actually closes off and allows everything to work like it's supposed to. So we feel real good about that program. You talked about the steel high pressure. We do have a corrosion protection program for that, so we've got 1,400 test stations out connected to that steel pipe, and we've got technicians that annually take those readings. They look at the baselines, and they're basically watching the integrity of that steel pipe and making sure it's still good. That's a regulatory component that we have to do, and it just makes sure we're getting the appropriate life out of that pipe and we're ready to replace it when it's due to be replaced. And then lastly, we talked about those regulator stations again. An example, I think this is the Virginia Avenue gas pressure regulation station. We literally send technicians out on an annual basis to each and every one of these, the 46 stations that are out there, and they lay hands on all the mechanical parts, all the instrumentation, and they make sure everything's working the way it's supposed to do every single year. And lastly, with the gas system, obviously y'all have heard a lot about growth with gas here, so we do have a significant budget for growth, and we're continuing, as you can see with the chart, to see that growth going even through the pandemic and into inflation, a lot of development going on. So we spend about $3 million on main extensions to get to where people need us to be. We spend about $6 million on subdivisions and new services going in. And we plan to buy about 2,000 new gas meters next year at 3.8. So I think I was remiss in saying, you know, the gas system hasn't seen as much inflationary impact as the other utilities have yet. But we are getting our first indicators that these meters are beginning to creep up in price a bit. So we do expect contract labor costs and other costs inside of the gas system to probably start impacting us pretty soon. But we've been fortunate to date. And then lastly, growth-wise, we talked about that East Bridge looping extension. That's got a bit of growth attached to it as well, beyond just the resiliency. So in closing for gas, same message here. We're very invested in both state and national agencies working with gas. We do get a lot of feedback and input on where gas regulations are going and what programs need to be built. We're environmentally focused, we're safety focused, and we're trying to be very forward-looking in this regard. And you see some of the agencies we work with there, but I think we feel pretty good about our plan for next year. Questions?
I do have one question back to the steel versus plastic piping and the move to plastic. I mean, I understand that plastic is more cost effective. Are there other trade-offs between steel and plastic? I mean, there's a lot of, we're worried now about all these PFAS regulation and sort of plastics leaching, and I assume you've looked at that and thought about
Yeah, I don't know
what might
PFAS.
come with using plastic.
Yeah, I don't know if it directly impacts the gas. I don't think that's what you're asking, but yeah, there are puts and takes with that, and always pressure is part of that. Cost is a part of that. But plastic is the industry standard for most gas systems, moving away from cast iron and steel and other older types. It's got a very long life cycle, which helps us. Most of our pipe's relatively new, so, you know, that's just a strategy we've chosen, but I don't think we've done a chemical analysis of the impact of that pipe at all, if that's fair.
One thing I will say about gas as well with the plastic pipe is you get a much better weld. There's just technology you can put on that can ensure that it bonds together correctly at each joint, and it actually, when you do weld gas pipe, you actually get a better connection than even the pipe itself where it welds together like that. There's just a lot better installation methods and insurances around making sure the pipe the properties are there and the gas stays in the pipe like it's supposed to. Whereas with the distribution level steel, those mechanical joints and things like that are more difficult to get the proper seal for over a long period of time. So it's inherently a more resilient pipe, I think,
It's
overall,
tighter.
and it's
Much-
tighter,
much tighter
which
for
is
the
good
environmental
from an
impact.
environmental perspective.
Yeah,
You
that's a
want to
great
keep the
point.
gas in the pipe, which us having a largely predominantly plastic system allows us to have a really tight system, which is, you know, really good from an environmental perspective.
Yeah, it's a great point.
We're just
Alright.
facing a lot of regulatory scrutiny in our industry around anything that has plastic in it, so I just didn't know if that was happening in the gas industry or not.
Yeah, well, I'll take that away from here and I'll go poke our engineering folks and we'll just pose the question to them and give them something to do. How about that?
They like to regulate things, so.
All right, I'm gonna hand.
All right. Well, thanks, John. Good morning. So we'll talk about the water fiscal year 24 budget, and then we'll talk about the water fiscal 20. And kind of in a similar manner to what you saw with John's presentation, we'll kind of start out talking about the map, and then we'll kind of slide into some of the projects. So this is something that you've probably seen before, but it's a map of KUB's water system. Our service territory is outlined in red on the map on the right. You can see the shaded area kind of on the left side of the area this is the city of Knoxville, and you can see it also includes a significant portion of East Knox County, almost out into Jefferson County. We operate 27 pump stations, 28 storage facilities, and we have our one water treatment plant, which is located off Riverside Drive. One of the other things I wanted to point out is that we actually also serve two customers on the eastern end of our system. So Shady Grove Utility District and also the town of Dandridge purchase water from KUB on the eastern side of our system, our service territory. And kind of a similar to what John was talking about with natural gas and also with electric, you know, our main goals for the water system is to provide reliability and then also ensure high quality water is provided to our customers. So those are our two main goals on the water system. So we'll start out kind of at a high level, similar to what we've seen before. We'll start out talking about the budget, and we'll kind of walk through different parts and pieces of the water system and kind of look at different investments that we're going to be working on for FY24. So our capital investments for FY24 is $55.2 million. On the O&M side, we've got $36 million slated for next year. We'll kind of walk through, we'll start out talking about our treatment plants. Gabe alluded to it earlier, but we've got the filters project, which is a really neat project that we want to talk a little bit about and fill everybody in on. We'll talk about our distribution system. You know, we got 1,400 miles of pipe out in our system where we send water out to customers. So we've got projects slated for those types of, for that type of stuff. And you can see the picture on the right there is a 24-inch water line that we put in down on Strawberry Plains Pike. So we've got a lot of that going on. We've got a lot of large diameter, small diameter stuff going on. Then we'll also talk about remote sites. Remote sites are critical to keeping the water system going, pumping and things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then at the end, we want to talk about technology. Kind of in the same vein that we talked about with preventative maintenance. There's a lot of neat things that we're doing on the technology side on the water system. You heard a little bit about it with the winter weather event when Nathan was here, Nathan Beyblade was here and talked about that. You heard about some of the technology, but we'll talk a little bit more about that and kind of get in depth on that too. The bottom picture on the right is just a picture of our water treatment plant. So we'll kick right into it. We'll start off talking about the water treatment plant projects. So we talked about it a little bit earlier, but the filters project, it's a really neat project. It's an exciting project. It's actually the largest single project in KUB's history. It's a $65 million project. It's the cornerstone of our water supply master plan. And so what our water supply master plan does, is it actually, it's geared towards our water treatment plant, and it provides, additional storage, additional pumping capacity, and, also treatment capacity there at the plant to be able to ensure longevity. The 6 new filters that we're building there, and you can see this picture up to the left right here. You probably might have seen this before, but this is the new filter building that we're going to be building. The 6 new filters will add 38 million gallons of capacity to the plant. And we also, one of the things we want to point out is we're working closely with the city of Knoxville and Knox County to provide ARPA funding. And so ARPA funding is a loan that we're getting it's the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, which we're getting over the course of the project, and we're getting $25 million from Knox County, or through Knox County and the city of Knoxville for that project. The construction schedule has actually just started recently. We kicked off construction in October. You can see this picture at the bottom right here. This is one of the initial sediment basins that we're constructing for the project. Kicked off in October. We're planning on doing work in FY24 and then finishing up in FY25. In FY24, we're actually planning to spend about a little over $32 million on the project. And so we talked about impacts. I know John talked a lot about impacts for the things that he spoke about. And so we saw an impact on this project. It's not going to be realized necessarily in FY24, but in FY23, we saw a 30% inflationary impact when we bid the project out over pre-pandemic pricing. Any questions on that project?
How much did you say ARPA funding was going to come through the city?
$25 million.
And we've already started submitting some reimbursement requests to the city. So hopefully some of that will start coming through soon.
Do they just have the money sitting there for us?
It is a combination, Commissioner Herbert. Some of that is already sitting there for both the city and the county, about 17 million of it, I believe, and the rest is with the state and TDEC, and we had to go through a whole application process for that with the city and the county. So we're hoping those funds will become available this summer.
Okay, thanks. Good questions. So okay, that will transition to our distribution system projects. So this covers the 1,400 miles of distribution mains we have out in the system. So we maintain a comprehensive and data-driven main replacement program, which evaluates our smaller distribution mains and also our larger transmission mains, like you saw in the picture of the 24-inch line we're putting off Strawberry Plains Pike. In FY24, we're looking at spending a combined $5.5 million on these type of projects. You can see up at the top, we've got $3.5 million slated towards a cast iron replacement program, and then we've got $2 million in capital slated towards our galvanized replacement program. The chart here on the right kind of gives an outline of what our system is made of. So 65% of the pipes out in our system are newer material. That includes ductile iron and plastic. And then about 35% of our pipes are older types of pipes, and that includes cast iron, galvanized, and cement. So, you know, the cast iron and the galvanized programs are slated to replace those older types of mains, so we're looking to replace that kind. As we build our FY24 budgets up, we've also seen a lot of inflationary impacts. So you can see we've kind of listed some of those out. Ductile iron pipe costs are up 45%. Valves and hydrants, the material costs for both those items are up about 40%. And then on top of the material costs, we've also seen an increased labor costs associated with projects, so about 20% increase on that too. So as we go to build this stuff, we've seen an increase. We're having to deal with that and kind of add that into our plan. Any questions there? Okay, so you know, talking about inflationary impacts, what kind of impact has that had on our FY24 budget? So this kind of spells that out. So, you know, each year we're looking to replace about 14 miles of pipe out in our distribution system. That's about 1% of our pipe, and that gives the pipe life expectancy of about 100 years. So that's what we're looking to maintain. So there's that 14 miles. So in FY24, we're reducing that pace down, and a lot of that has to do with the inflationary impacts that we just talked about. So we've reduced our pace in FY24, comparing it from last year's plan to this year's plan. We've replaced it by we've reduced it by 1.8 miles. So that shows, you can see there on the graph on the right, that shows that we're about 6 miles under our 14-mile target. So, you know, those impacts are something that we'll have to be aware of, and it's kind of, as John alluded to too, these are kind of things that are changing, you know, as the market changes and stuff like that. So we're constantly monitoring this stuff. Any questions there? Okay. So now we want to highlight some good news. So, we talked about inflationary impacts, but we also had some really good news as far as a reduction in pipe repairs. So, KUB proactively replaces water mains out in the system. So one of the things that we monitor, each year is we're monitoring pipe repairs, main breaks, if you want to say it. So if you look at this graph, we've got this graph here on the right, shows the last 20 years of main repairs. And you can see if you compare FY 2008 to FY 2022, we've had about a 60% reduction since 2008. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of the good programs and the initiatives that the KUB board has approved over the years. We've done a lot of pipe replacement, a lot of preventative maintenance. It's really had a big impact on it. One of the really big drivers that we've had is we initially, when we first started working on Century 2 back in 2006, we identified that galvanized pipe was the leakiest type of pipe that we have out in our system. And so over the last, say, 15 years, we've really honed in on replacing that. So if you look at the graphic on the right, in FY 08, galvanized pipe was about 50% of the mains that we repaired. Fast forward to FY 22, and it's less than 5%. So we made some really big gains in that ground, and that's really helped drive down those numbers. So FY 22 was the lowest year that we have as far as main breaks, and that follows 3 consecutive years of low years too. So it's really something to be proud of there. We also have, we saw the chart earlier talking about the older types of pipes that KUB has in the system. We still have a little less than 500 miles of cast iron and cement in our system. That's the gray and the blue main breaks right there. So we've been working to narrow those down, but we're going to continue doing that in the future. That's a little bit different. Galvanized pipe is typically 2-inch pipe. It's smaller diameter stuff. It's used, dead ends and things like that. So that's what we've been focused on replacing. Now we're going to have to start focusing as we get the galvanized out of the system on some of the cement and the AC lines, which are a little bit larger diameter, so they may be a little bit more costly, but we're factoring that in. Also, just want to note that the galvanized will all be replaced by 2027. We still have about 14 miles of it in our system to take out.
So the goal is to replace the cement and the cast iron with ductile iron and plastic?
Yeah, typically what we use now is HDPE, which is sort of, I know John was talking about before about they use polyethylene on the gas side. So we use HDPE and we use ductile iron, are typically the 2 types of pipe that we use.
So as we do replacement, those are the 2 types of pipes we'll be using?
Yes.
Okay. And so that HDPE will also do gas and water?
They use MDPE on the gas side. I think is more of a medium density polyethylene. HDPE is high density polyethylene. They use that on the water side.
Okay.
Looks very similar.
Mm-hmm.
Different color.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay, so now we want to talk about KUB's remote sites. So remote sites across KUB's water footprint are strategically located to ensure adequate pressure, water storage, and pumping capacity. So in FY 24, we're planning to spend $2.6 million across these stations. That $2.6 million is going to build a new booster pump station off Middlebrook Pike, and we're also going to install a pressure reducing valve out there too. So what this will do for us, it'll help parallel one of our largest and most critical booster pump stations, the Third Creek Booster Pump Station, and the pressure reducing valve will help feed from Third Creek to West Knox when needed. So this really eliminates 2 potential single points of failure out in our system at some big stations. So this provides critical redundancy and resiliency. As far as impacts on the remote sites, one of the things that we've seen is generator and electrical equipment have gotten really long lead times. So the lead times for, say, a generator have increased by probably about a year, about 12 to 14 months. So what we're having to do now is bid out projects, actually do a lot of construction, and then order this stuff at the very beginning and then wait. So we're giving contracts out that are, say, 20 months, where typically they would have been like a 10 or 12 month type project. So impacts there. And this is what I mentioned earlier. We want to talk about some technology that's really helping out as far as it's helping out with reliability, but it's also helping out with customers too. We'll talk about the AMI is really helping customers, but we have a bunch of different programs on the maintenance side in water. Leak prevention is one of our key programs. So what we do on that side is, we actually go out in the system, look at places where we potentially have higher pressure out in the system, and what we're doing is spending dollars to install pressure reducing valves. So in FY24, KUB is looking to spend $441,000 to install several pressure reducing valves across the system, and what that does is it actually relieves some of the pressure on some of the pipes. When you have higher pressure, you're more likely to get leaks, and that actually helps extend the life of the pipe when you can reduce the pressure. One other thing that we've done too is we've made sure that all of our booster pump stations where pumps are kicking on and off, we've made sure that we've got what we call system calming at all of our stations. And what that is it's a way that we do a soft start. So what happens sometimes if you turn a pump on really fast, it kicks on the water side, you can have water hammer out in the system. So sometimes that can potentially lead to leaks and breaks. So what we've done at all of our systems is set up a way that we can ramp up and down the pumps, and that way that leads to less breaks. Also, we have a really good leak detection program. So you've probably heard about this over the course of the past couple of years. We've segmented our system using district metering. So you can see down here on the right, we've kind of came in and put meters out in the system. So essentially we've encircled these areas. We're using AMI meters to look at demand, and we're using these meters to tell how much is going into an area. So we can actually break up the system and look for smaller leaks. Whereas before, prior to, we'd go out and leak detect the system, but we couldn't hone in on certain areas. Now we've actually got software where every day you flip on the screen and it tells if an area is elevated, meaning you might have a leak in that area. You can send leak detection folks out in there, and they can find the leaks and fix it. So we've got about $230,000 in O&M slated for FY24 to maintain those district metered sites. We also have a program called Find and Fix, and so what we do is each year we select some of the areas that we believe maybe have gotten a little bit more leakage in them, and we'll actually send proactive leak detection folks out into those areas. They'll identify leaks, then we'll send a contractor out there to fix that. And that's about $1 million that we have in O&M expenditures slated for FY24. And then finally, AMI, advanced metering infrastructure, is something that we put in several years ago, but this is really helping on the water side a lot, and it's really helping customers too. One of the things that it's really good for is, it gives us real-time information coming back off the meter to tell if there's a potential leak past the meter. The customer owns past the meter, so that's their part of the service line. But AMI technology lets people see when there's potentially a meter, so we're able to notify people, and let them know something may be happening past their meter. Also, we talked about it before too, but last winter when we had we had all the freezing weather, we had sub-zero or sub-freezing temperatures. We had a lot of frozen lines out in the system and stuff like that. AMI technology, using the real-time data that we got back from that, we're able to go out and identify which services were leaking and frozen and stuff like that. Start contacting customers and tell them we wanted to go ahead and shut the line off. At that time, the water treatment plant, it was elevated because we were pumping out a lot more water because we had leaks and stuff out in the system that we were able to find. But the AMI technology allowed us to find that, and it really ramped that down a lot quicker. In past years when we'd had that same kind of sort of polar freeze type effect, it took us a lot longer to be able to find that and get the flow at the plant ramped back down. But this December, we were able to do that in just a couple of days. So it was really, really amazing. I think it's one of those things where we put AMI in for a reason. This is just one of those added benefits that we've just found out about recently. So excited about that. Any questions on that? Okay, so one of the other things we wanted to highlight is water treatment chemicals. So obviously, we've got our MBW plant down on Riverside. We use chemicals when we're treating the water. Once we bring it out of the river, we have to treat it, and then we pump it out into the system. So we've seen a significant increase on the cost of treatment chemicals, and they're actually way outpacing inflation. You can see from this graph on the right, you can see, this is kind of the FY21, FY22, FY23. You can see how the cost of some of these chemicals has gone up significantly over the course of time. So on the water side, for water treatment for fiscal year 24, we're looking at an O&M increase of $373,000. Some of the impacts on just the individual chemicals that we track. Sodium hypochlorite is what we use as the main disinfectant, on both the water and wastewater side. Just in the past year, that's gone up over 100%, which is, we have to treat the water, so that's not something that we can not use. And then also other things, other different chemicals, ferrous chloride, other things like that have been up 30 to 40%. So we're seeing a significant increase on this kind of chemicals, and we just want to point that out. So just to kind of wrap things up on the water side, obviously we talked about at the beginning when we reiterated too, water quality and resiliency is our focus. That's what we're thinking about every day. That's what all of our folks are working on. We talked about the filters project. That's going to increase treatment resiliency. It's part of the water supply master plan. it's the cornerstone of that whole project. You know, we talked about our distribution system project. You know, we're strategically looking to replace older types of pipe, and you know, we're trying to systematically do that and work our way through the system. The new booster pump station that we talked about off Middlebrook Pike will really be a big increase. It'll increase the resiliency. And also, just wanted to note, I didn't mention it when we were talking about it, that's going to be actually right outside of our Middlebrook campus, Middlebrook Pike campus. So if you drive, as you enter that Middlebrook campus, the new station will be right there in the median, just east of Weigels. So you'll see that when you come in and out of our Middlebrook campus. And then also, we just talked about technology. You know, technology and data. You know, obviously, you know, things are getting more advanced in computing, things like that. More data, more technology. We're just figuring out more ways to use it on the water side. It's also helping customers. It's also helping identify, you know, issues we have in the system too. So, also just wanted to point out too, you know, KUB continues to achieve recognition within the water industry for award-winning service. You can see on the right there some of the awards that we've received in the past year. We've gotten awards from the American Water Works Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, and then KUB is also a utility of the future too. So just wanted to point that out. So any questions on the water? Anything to discuss? Good. Okay. Yeah. Well, so we will transition to wastewater and talk about our fiscal 24 budget. And kind of in a similar vein to what we saw on the other utilities. We'll first start talking about the map, and then we'll kind of talk about the budget and kind of walk our way through some of the projects and things like that too. So this shows this map on the right shows our wastewater service territory, which is outlined in red. Similar to what you saw before on the water side, you can see the city of Knoxville is shaded here. Also, like the water system, it includes, you know, a significant portion of East Knox County. But the one thing to note here is the service territory for the water system was a little less than 200 square miles. This is a little bit larger. This area up here of northeast Knox County is also included in that service territory. We operate and maintain 4 treatment plants, 64 pump stations, and 6 storage tanks. We have a little over 73,000 customers. I know it was mentioned last year, but we want to point out that the wastewater consent decree ran between 2005 and 2022. So similar to what we talked about with the other utilities, so our main goal on the wastewater side is we want to focus on the environment, you know, reduce SSOs, and also system resiliency. SSOs are? Sanitary sewer overflows. Yeah. So we'll talk through some of our FY24 investments on the capital and O&M side. As we kind of did with the water, we'll kind of move through some of the major asset classes. And then we'll kind of dive a little bit deeper into them and talk about projects. So for FY24, we've got $47.5 million slated for the capital side. On the O&M side, we've got $44.6 million towards those activities. So, you know, obviously we've got our larger asset groups. We've got our 4 water treatment plants that we mentioned earlier, remote sites. Then we've got our collection system rehabilitation. You know, we've got our collection system. And then also we've got preventative maintenance and system inspections. And so as we kind of move through that, we'll talk about different projects. There's some pictures here on the right. We've got some pictures of this would be something from a collection system rehabilitation project where they're setting a new manhole out in the system. And then also one thing I want to point out too, you know, we do it on the water and the wastewater, but our laboratory group is critical to what we do every day because, you know, obviously at the water treatment plant, they're taking samples and just making sure that everything is up to par and meeting standards. On the wastewater side, they do the same thing. So there's hundreds of samples being taken all the time and being analyzed to make sure that we're compliant with everything. So we'll kick off talking about our water treatment plant projects. You know, and obviously just want to go back and sort of reiterate that, you know, these treatment plants received significant upgrades during the wastewater consent decree. We probably talked about it last year, but the Biologically Enhanced High Rate Clarification Project, or BHRC, was the final consent decree project that finished up last year at Kauai. In fiscal year 24, we're planning to spend about $4.2 million at the wastewater treatment plants. Some of the projects that we have slated for those within that budget will be some electrical upgrades that are needed at Loves Creek, and then also too at Kauai, we're replacing the equipment inside of 2 of the clarifiers. One of the impacts that we have seen just on those projects is a 40% increase in the equipment cost and the clarifier from what we saw last year. So, calling what we saw in the, talking about electrical equipment, generation, stuff like that, we've also seen some increases on that side too. We also want to talk about remote sites. So remote sites are strategically, located across the collection system. They're there to be able to pump, convey, and temporarily store wastewater. A lot of these consist of, storage tanks and pump stations. So in FY24, we're planning to spend about $9.6 million on pump station upgrades. About $2.1 million of that is upgrades at our Holston Hills pump station. We're upgrading the force main in the pump station. So that includes some new pumps, work on the wet well, electrical, and also a generator. And that construction will all be completed in FY24. Also just want to point out too that we'll be wrapping up construction at the Jones Street pump station. Spend about $3.8 million on that in FY24. And then also the impacts that we've seen due to inflation, generator and electrical equipment lead times, add a year to whatever you're looking for. So we're trying to order those on the front end of projects to kind of get in front of that. But, like I mentioned before on the water side, we're having to extend some of the contract times out for those to be able to get the parts in and get that stuff done. Any questions on that? Okay, so then we'll talk about the collection system rehabilitation. Talk a little bit about the types of pipe that we have in the system, kind of like we did on the water side too. But this is sort of the lifeblood of on the wastewater side. So in fiscal year 24, we're looking to spend about $20.8 million on collection system rehabilitations, and that'll be spread across several area projects. And within that budget, we're looking to rehabilitate or replace about 11.5 miles of pipe. And you can see here on the pipe, kind of similar to what we saw on the water side, we'll talk about it in terms of newer pipe and older pipe. So about 64% of KUB's collection system is newer type pipe. So that's plastic, that's ductile iron, and also lined. We talk about CIPP liners, cured in place liners. That's what we're talking about when we talk about line pipe. 36% is older type pipe. That's concrete pipe that we have in the system. It's also clay and brick pipe. So what we do is when we're looking to build projects up, we're looking to match system needs up to these projects. So, we're focusing on areas that we have the older type pipe, the concrete, the clay, and the brick. And then also too, we're focused on potentially where we might have SSOs that pop up, and we're trying to remedy that. As far as impacts based off inflation go, ductile iron pipe, as we mentioned on the water side, is up about 45% over the past year. And then also contract labor is also up about 20%. So, any questions there? So, talking about the inflationary impacts and things that we just talked about on the last screen, we've had to reduce our pipe replacement rate. So, during the consent decree, we were averaging about replacement of about 25 miles per year. We've reduced that down to about 20 miles per year. So that what that does is it gives us a 66-year pipe life expectancy rate, and then also too that we're replacing about 1.5% of the system each year. So based off the what we had comparing last year's plan to this year's plan, last year's plan we were planning to replace 13.3 miles. So we backed that off of about a mile, 1.8 miles. So now we're down to 11.5 miles due to those inflationary increases. Because of the drivers we talked about, the ductile iron, the cost drivers. Okay, so one of the really unique and kind of neat projects we want to talk a little bit about is the Needham Drive trunk rehabilitation project. And this one was really neat. Neat project. It's kind of a one you don't see very often. So we have just upstream of our Kauai wastewater treatment plant, which is located right down here on Needham Drive. This is Thompson Bowling Arena. We've got some 74 and 78 and 84 inch trunk sewers that run up and down through here. And so some recent inspections we've done using sonar and LiDAR in those pipes have shown some significant corrosion on the pipe, the concrete pipe, above the flow line of the pipe. And so, we're looking at perspective of we need to do something to this pipe to make sure that, it's going to last another 80, 100 years, something like that. So we actually brought a contractor on board to help us evaluate potential options for what we could do. And so what we've ultimately done is we've settled on a epoxy coating. So there's a coating that you can go in the pipe, and somebody can actually walk down the pipe and you can spray it up on the pipe, and it will coat the concrete and actually extend the life. It'll almost make it like a new pipe. And so we've looked at a couple different options, and that's the epoxy lining is what we found to be the best alternative. So we're planning to do that work starting here in the next month or so. It's an $8.8 million project. And I also want to point out right here too that this is the inspection. So when they went in the pipe with sonar and LiDAR, this is anywhere you see kind of orange right there along that length is corrosion in the pipe. So that's where they went up and down through the pipe, and that's corrosion that they found during the inspection. And that's what we're trying to fix as part of the project. You know, one of the things about this line too is it's probably, on average, probably 20 or so feet deep. So it would be very difficult to try to replace it, you know, as far as open cut. It would be very costly. So this is really the best alternative that we found to be able to replace this thing. So what'll happen is the crews will go in at night when the flow is really low in the pipe, and they'll go in and spray the top of the pipe, and they'll be able to get that sealed back up. So that'll be occurring in FY24. It's a really neat project. We're kind of excited about that one.
How long will that project take?
It'll probably take about 3 months altogether.
Oh,
Is the corrosion caused by what's given off from the wastewater going through the pipe?
Yeah,
Okay.
it is. The hydrogen sulfide, methane kind of stuff that comes off the wastewater just kind of eats into the concrete over time.
Okay, so as you're installing new wastewater pipes, what's being done in advance to try and make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so ductile iron pipe, you know, if you're putting in ductile iron pipe, it's got a coating on the inside of it that keeps it from being corroded. Also, a lot of times, you know, we're putting those, we talked about cured in place liners, so you're actually putting a liner through the pipe. That's corrosion resistant too.
Okay.
And then also too, sometimes we do what we call pipe bursting, and that's where we pull a new HDP line through the pipe, and it's also doesn't react to those gases.
Thank you.
Yeah. So next, I want to point out a reduction in overflows. This is also, you know, a good story too. So you can see on the graph on the right here, it's kind of busy, but we'll kind of walk through this. We can see that we've seen a significant reduction in SSOs over the past 20 years, and really, we'll talk through it, but we believe that those results are a direct reflection on, you know, preventative maintenance and capital programs that the board has approved over the past 20 years. So this chart illustrates SSOs, total yearly rainfall, and the number of events each year that exceed the two-year storm criteria. The three types of SSOs displayed are the green right here. These are dry weather SSOs, which are colored green, and they're not rainfall related. They're typically related to blockages and pipe defects. The blue colored SSOs are wet weather SSOs, and they're influenced and caused by rainfall. And then the red colored SSOs are ones that were caused by rainfall that was greater than a 2-year event, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute. But those are caused by excessive rainfall beyond the 2-year storm design criteria that was established during the consent decree. So looking, you know, the good news is looking at 2022, that we actually tied our lowest year for dry and wet weather SSOs at 61. So that's a really good statistic to have. We believe, you know, that has a lot to do with capital and proactive maintenance programs. Rainfall obviously has a significant impact on potentially on SSOs. There's a lot of factors: intensity and duration, you know, flooding, ground saturation, things like that can really play a factor. And also too, you know, older type pipes, we still have about 450 miles of older pipe, which we talked about before, is the clay and the concrete. We still have that in the system. That's a lot more prone to influence from rainfall. You know, potentially can cause SSOs. That's what we're trying to eliminate that. You know, one of the things I want to point out right here at the very end of this slide, the last 4 years, you can see a lot of red greater than 2-year event SSOs. So we'll talk for a minute about that. So you know, so the way that we look at 2-year storms, you know, you saw the slide before with the increases of that. So we've seen a lot of wet weather events over the past 4 years. You know, a bunch of 2-year storms that have exceeded that. And really, in fact, if you think back about it, you know, there's 3 of these 4 years were some of the wettest on record in Knoxville: 2018, 2019, In 2020, we're within the top 10 wettest years in Knoxville, so which are abnormal. But if you look at this on the right, this graph on the right, there's actually 7 of these 2-year events have occurred in the past 4 years, which is statistically abnormal. Yeah. We would expect a 2-year event to occur every 2 years, but what we've seen actually is that so you expect 5 to happen in 10 years, you would expect 2 to happen in 4 years, but we've averaged 1 over the past 10 years, and then we've had 7 in the past 4 years. So I just want to point out that that's what's causing what's causing the red here at the end of the graph. Now I want to hit on our system inspection and preventive maintenance programs. And so each of these programs that we're getting ready to talk about right here kind of build off and feed off each other. In fiscal year 24, on the inspection and preventive maintenance side, we're looking to spend about $2 million in O&M for that. And so, the way it works is we do video inspections of the pipe. They actually send a camera up in the pipe to assess and see what's going on, potentially look for defects. And that's a camera crew right there figuring to put a camera down into the pipe. This is a video of what it would look like when they find, a defect in the pipe. They find like roots or something like that. So that's found during video inspections. They also do manhole inspections. So somebody will actually go and do an inspection of each of the manholes and look for defects and things like that. Can allow I&I to get into the system. We also do something called smoke testing, where we set up on top of a manhole and push like a substance through the sewers that looks for defects. So if you had like a downspout attached to the sewer or something like that, you might see like smoke coming out through like gutters or something like that, and that helps identify places where we're getting actually just a straight connection from rainfall into the sewers. Then finally, all that stuff feeds back into our blockage abatement program. So our blockage abatement program is actually where we go out and clear those blockages and roots and things like that, and make sure that they don't cause SSOs in the future. So all these programs kind of work together on a synergistic basis, to help make sure that we keep the sewers clean and reduce SSOs.
Kurt, when you mentioned earlier, you said that you found some leakage below the flow line. So when you talk about pipes, you don't necessarily send material through the entire pipe, but it's a flow line.
Yes, yes.
Don't use a full pipe's capacity. Is that what you're?
Yeah. So you think about it. So we talked about a little bit earlier. So at night is when there's the least amount of flow in the pipe. So that contractor's looking to. So you're not going to get flow below that level. So you don't necessarily need to like spray that coating on the pipe below the flow line. So if you're doing it at night, that's where you're getting you're able to actually coat the whole pipe, and then during the day you may get more flow. It may raise up halfway through the pipe, but that's not doing it at nights when you get the nighttime low flows. Okay. So wanted to point out on the wastewater side just the inflationary impact that we've had on treatment chemicals. There's a big overlap on treatment chemicals between water and wastewater. All the same chemicals we use for each one of them. We talked about sodium hypochlorite being up 106%. So on the wastewater side, for FY24, we're seeing a $429,000 O&M impact. From looking at last year's plan to this year's plan. So it's just the rising cost of chemicals is something that we're going to have to keep an eye on, and just want to point that out as part of this presentation. So to kind of wrap up things on the wastewater side, we want to focus on system resiliency and the environment. That's kind of our main focus. I want to make sure we're always focused on that. System resiliency is a big thing. So, we talked about remote sites, and the projects we're doing there is make sure that the system's resilient. The plant's projects, those are all built for resiliency. On our collection system rehabilitation projects, we're looking to match up, needs. Places where we have an SSOs, places where we have older pipe, we're looking to replace that, get that to the newer type of pipe. We're constantly monitoring, where's an overflow at, and we'll adjust our rehabilitation maintenance efforts towards that area. And then also too, we have coordinated O&M programs to extend the asset's life, and effectively reduce SSOs. So really on the wastewater side, you got the capital, you got the O&M. They work really hand in hand to reduce SSOs, and we saw on that graph that we're in a good spot on that in that regards. So any questions on the wastewater side? Okay.
All right, so we'll take a quick break. How many minutes do we have, Gabe? 10? All right, we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll get back at it. Jamie, it is all yours.
All right. Thank you, Commissioners. Good to be talking to you today about our plans for a fiscal year 24 in the fiber division as guideposts for today. We'll kind of talk about where we are as far as deployment goes, what's gone well, what have been some of our challenges. We'll also talk a little bit about how we've connected with our customers and our plans going forward in developing our brand and the results of that. Take a quick look at the competitive landscape that we play in. We all knew this would be a competitive marketplace when we got into it. Want to take a look and take a pulse of where we are today in that, and then round up our discussion today talking about our financial plans for the upcoming fiscal year. So before we do, much like some of the other systems, want to take a look backwards and say it's been a big year. It feels like yesterday that we were literally, most of us, sitting at the Expo Center or the Change Center, answering questions from the public and some of our friends, asking us why in the world we want to do this. But it's been a very busy year from that July 1 of 21 when the authority was finally granted from this board, from the state, from city council that we were in business. And so in that year, a lot of work happened, some foundational tasks in which we weren't really visible in the public. But beginning in July 1 of this year was when we launched our first pilot customer and put light on the line and started serving our internet. We had our first paying customers then in September. There you can see our first, both on the residential side and on the business side in September of 22. And then shortly thereafter served our first multiple dwelling unit, think apartment complexes, townhomes, that kind of notion. So if you hear me say MDU, that's what I mean by that. And then here recently, finally got opportunity to launch our TV and phone product in 2023. So in this past year, 650 miles of fiber, 5 huts. Most of you all have visited a hut. The structure that's kind of the brains of our entity, 70 servers that we've installed, 2 internet connections to the backbone of the internet, 80 fiber employees, including Jaleisha Spears, who you'll see in the picture there, one of our customer service representatives, and our fiber call center that we met at our job fair there at Pellissippi on Magnolia that many of you all attended. So great accomplishments by our team this year, things that we are very proud of. It didn't come without challenges. And as my peers have spoken to today, supply chain has affected everything and everybody, even all of us personally. Anything with a chip in it, you've heard me say this before, anything with a chip in it, it really just was a log jam. So where did this impact us predominantly? In servers, electronics, even vehicles in that particular regard. Some of that pressure has freed up on the electronic side. I think some of the servers lead times are better than they were. They're not back to historical. Along with our electronics, vehicles now are still a very long lead time. I know John mentioned transportation, which is his responsibility. Typical bucket truck used to take 6 months to get. We're up to 2+ years now. So even though we can plan ahead and forecast ahead, guess what? Everybody's doing that. And so the queues are absolutely stacked. So the unpredictability of supply chain continues to plague us all in that particular regard. And our contractors and vendors weren't immune to this either. We depend on contractors and vendors to do a lot of things in this space. One of the key things that ultimately impacted us on being able to light those first customers was establishing connection to the internet. That requires electronics, and they were delayed as well too. So that kind of got us a slow start out the gate as well. Net impacts were that delay, and then ultimately us having to pivot and change and make strategic decisions about how we move forward in things like, for instance, taking our internet service live without key things like our television and phone product, along with programs like the ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program. So we've pivoted. We've tried to meet the challenges moving ahead. We've made trade-offs just like the other divisions as it relates to cost, but we continue to move forward and be successful in that particular regard. There were also other challenges, and maybe even more impactful here locally and personally, specifically as it relates to underground fiber construction. I spent some time in underground construction here in my career at KUB, and I'll tell you, the challenges presented by underground fiber construction are totally different in many cases to fiber underground construction. We don't experience the type of tight corridors and the placement of where these are, and there are plenty of unmarked utilities in the telecom space. So very tight corridor. The 2 or 3 providers that are existing in all of our neighborhoods, they're there alongside with us. They're unmarked in that particular case, not like our utilities, which are marked. with gas and water and underground electric and so forth. They're at a depth that's different than our utilities, and we're all together kind of, I call it in a coffin, if you will. And alongside of that, we're onboarding new contractors for KUB. Not necessarily new in this telecom space, but also just new to KUB, and we're learning this construction alongside them and how we do business here at KUB in that particular regard. And when it doesn't go right, it's personal. It impacts things like your existing telecom space, your irrigation systems, which aren't marked. It impacts beautiful yards, which this is the worst time of the year to be digging because it's Augusta season, right? And it can look bad like this. This is personal. This is a picture over in the Riverbend community. If you came home to see that beautiful yard looking like that, that would be pretty impactful, right? But I want to point out a couple of things that show really to the lens in which we're going to in this particular regard. You'll see tarps here on the ground to catch the spoil so that it doesn't sit in your yard and things like that. You also notice shovels that are hanging out inside the deal. There's a lot of hand digging that goes on in this space as well too. But you also know, again, these beautifully striped yards that exist all over where we're going right now. And I take great pride in my yard and my home, and I know that if I came home and saw this, I would be a little bit shocked as well too. The good news is this, is we don't always get it right, but usually we leave it in a condition that looks like that. So you'll also notice, I meant to point out the sod that we've cut so that we can put that back in place. So we're trying to take good care in that particular regard, but one thing that we can do better in that regard is just to be sure that our customers understand what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and what kind of condition we're going to leave it in, and when we don't get it right, for them to be able to contact us. And really appreciate some feedback from our commissioners and many of our customers in this regard, sincerely, that'll help us get better in this. We do a lot in the area of construction communication today, but this is a little bit different. We move at a little bit different pace, a little faster in many cases, and a lot of times we're here, there, and gone in that regard, and we're using different techniques, again, unmarked utilities, different depths, different locations. So one thing that we're going to do in addition to what we do from a construction
Never
perspective.
had that sign, by the way.
Yeah, this is brand new. This is as a literal result.
Very good.
Yes, so we're going to get. I've committed to get better, and this is one of the things that really Jay Miller, our marketing manager, and his team working with our communication staff and Tiffany staff and customer support have really kind of brainstormed and said what could be meaningful in this way. So, in addition to the things that we already do, whether it's tree trimming or our capital construction programs or all the maintenance programs you've heard. This was I think a graphic, and Jay's actually got a real life one now at this point. We're going to tell the folks as soon as every construction crew will have a sign that they put up at a very visible place in the neighborhood. They'll know who it is, and they'll know what it is in that particular regard. And you may be able to see it. There's a number here. It's not the 2911 number. We want to keep traffic off that main line. Tiffany's staff really wants that call to come straight to the construction support reps that can answer the specific questions about what's going on in the community, what's going on with this particular project. If they don't want to call, I can't hardly see that, and I've even known what this is. On the sign, it's really big, but it's a QR code. A lot of folks might want to stop, roll down their window, hit that QR code. It'll take them to the construction pages. It'll give them the contacts. It'll give them the information in that particular regard. So increased visibility in the community. That's one of our brainstorms. We're going to see how that's going to go. Yes?
Thank you so much for putting QR codes on there.
Okay.
I have like a peeve with that. You know, people want, especially on younger generation, like we don't want to go 8, 6, 5. Like no, and so
you don't even know where the numbers are on your phone, right?
come on,
I'm
I
teasing.
do know that. But
My daughter doesn't. I hear you. So.
But I think it's just so important. It happens everywhere I go, like fundraising events, and they have an envelope with I'm like, who? No one has to check anymore.
We just had that discussion this week. Yeah.
Yeah, and so this is awesome. I think
Yeah.
this is really quick. It's very easy for us to just scan and get the information we need. So that's awesome.
Well, again,
Thank you.
kudos to our
Marco.
yeah. We're actually using that on some of our KUB owned construction crews on the wraps we do. We don't want them to have to, in theory, if they're driving down the street, like pop that QR code, then they've got the link. Again, kudos to our marketing communications team that literally have come up with all these ideas.
Jamie, quick
Yes.
quiz. Do you know who invented QR codes? Who at least told me they invented QR codes?
Gabe Bolus. I don't know.
It's local.
Really? Who is it?
Denso.
Denso did. Well, there's if you're ever on Jeopardy, there you go. Awesome. That's pretty cool.
They could have made a whole lot of money, but they gave it away.
Yeah. The other thing we've done too is to be sure that KUB is more visible. Again, we want folks that are working and constructing focused on that work. We want folks that can in theory supervise that work from a quality perspective, a yard restoration perspective, as well as interact with our customers. We're going to put more folks in line with inspection that are KUB folks, that'll span of control kind of thing. As we get busier in this space, we're dedicated to adding resources in that area as well too, and we think that'll help. As far as reaching out to our customers, again, one thing that we've talked with Commissioner Feinbaum is just being sure that we know and folks know when they're going to get this service as well too. And one of the ways that we think that we can really encourage folks to do is get enrolled in our text notifications. We think that's the way other folks, if it's not QR codes, it's text, that people like in that regard. Also, we've found that our neighborhood groups really want to hear from us, so we've started our speaking tours at HOAs. I know we spoke at the Riverbend HOA, Andrew and Jay did not terribly long ago. We've got some other neat HOA activities I'll talk about in a second. But we're not in the neighborhood Facebook groups. We don't really want to be, and I don't think the residents want us there. But we know that's where a lot of action is. But we do know Nextdoor seems to be also a platform in which we can be helpful. So we're going to continue to push information to Nextdoor and try to catch it at that level too. And again, as customers do discuss on Facebook, we want them to know where that off-ramp is, to where they can get to the right information, talk to us so that we can make it right when it doesn't go right. Yes. Okay. I thought you had a question. Sorry. Let's see. So keeping all customers engaged. So one of the things we obviously want to do in a competitive environment is be sure that they know what our products are, know where they can sign up, know how they can get service in that particular regard. So we continue to direct mail and email outreach, also in a different way on a more localized level. Again, good feedback that we've received from this board to really talk to the folks in the areas in which why might it be taking so long? In other words, one of the things we hear is, when are you getting to me? And why is it taking so long to get? So we want to keep that dialogue going with those groups so they know kind of what our schedule plans are, where they can find out information in that regard as well. There's also plenty of opportunities to enhance our tracking of customer satisfaction. We're getting ready to launch a new platform in which we will receive customer feedback via text as well too, which is new to us in that particular space. It'll also give us a quicker opportunity to address any concerns they may have. Again, what you might not want to do is to sit on the phone, call us to take that time, but like a lot of us, you'll shoot a text to somebody and say, hey, my yard needs fixed, or what's going on over here on, Wood Lake, or whatever the case may be in that regard. The other neat thing that we've just now, kind of late breaking news, is we really want to get in the neighborhoods from even a sales perspective as well too. And one of the unique ways, again, that our team has come up with is to partner with HOAs to have like a little small community event on the evening, and in this case, to have a food truck come into the neighborhood and be there, and then we'll be there too alongside of them to how to get to East Tennesseans' hearts to have food. But in the Lincoln Park community, I believe Jay's right, the first one, May the 14th will be our first one, in which, again, the HOA's excited about it. They like having food trucks in their neighborhood. They'd like for us to be there as well too. And so again, a real organic way to connect with our communities and our customers in that particular regard. So almost door to door, but sure does feel better than door to door. You'll get a CJ taco with this one, so, or at least have an opportunity to purchase it. So,
Jamie, when you all do that, are you ready to hook up in that neighborhood?
we will do this in active neighborhoods or pre-sale in neighborhoods in which it's almost there. So in this case, Lincoln Park, it's live. They could sign up today, and if they called us today to get service. So really trying to move from that awareness phase into a true conversion deal. Our marketing staff, sales staff will be there that evening, literally ready with iPads to sign them up, place their orders, and get them rocking and rolling to be customers. Absolutely.
Where's Lincoln Park?
Describe.
North Broadway, north on Broadway, but just south of 640.
Okay.
Yeah, just literally to Chickamauga, top roads to there, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
You got it. Any other questions on kind of customer outreach? We'll talk a little bit about marketing specifically in a minute, but that's really kind of responding to some feedback that we've gotten about better communication, better outreach kind of notions. We're going to try some new things, honestly, that we haven't done before, and we'll see how it goes. So where do we stand today from a visual perspective? This is where service is available today, again, in that Mohawk, Arlington, and Carnes area ish. That's just because of the name of the substations. Think Dolltown, kind of where John was talking about earlier with our station there on Western Avenue. Before the end of this fiscal year, by June of 23, here just in a few months, we will open up our Luttrell area And our Fountain City, the rest of Fountain City in that particular regard, that's about adding about 15,000 more customers that'll be eligible. That'll take us up just north of 30,000 availability in that particular regard. Again, very excited about Luttrell, which, you know, really corresponds or goes over both Union. You can kind of see the county line go down through there, both in Union and in Granger County. The plurality of this area is covered by that grant, so we're excited about that regard. Really, customers are giving us a lot of feedback of hurry up, we're ready. So we're excited about that area up there. Then with the fiscal year 24 budget specifically, you can see what would be added in fiscal year 24. This is about another 60,000 available, taking us to a total of 90,000 available at that point. Areas added: Maynardville, House Mountain, Crippen Road, Ball Camp, Lonsdale, Rocky Hill, West Hills, South Knox. You can see all these in play in that particular regard as well. We'll point out again, probably about 50% of the Maynardville area funded by grants. The majority of House Mountain as well too, funded by grants as well. So very large areas, in many cases though, small density in that regard, but a lot of mileage in that particular regard. Just of interest, we'll have 5 more huts next year. So we're sitting at 5, we'll add 5 more as part of the fiscal year 24 plan.
What's the LN?
This is, what's that? Lonsdale.
Lonsdale.
Yeah.
But does that hit Sequoia? Is that all the way down to the river?
It does.
That's what I thought. That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys don't use this terminology in our community, right?
No, a lot of times this is just inside baseball. Yeah.
Okay.
We've really started talking about when we say you're available, we started using the literal communities.
Okay.
Because we find ourselves and I make fun of some of us who call Carnes. That's not Carnes, but that's all right. You know, it's like for those that have grown up in Knoxville, that's not Carnes. That's something else. But the way their substation in the community it serves, so it's more. If we started pivoting to the communities, we called out other substations because, like John's saying, we're deploying out of our electric infrastructure. We kind of keep it tied to that. So yeah. And that's the reason I was calling out some of those communities to be sure we kind of all knew where we're at.
I think for us as board members, I'm sorry,
No,
again,
that's
this
right.
is very much a conversation. I
No.
apologize, but I think for us as board members, or at least for me, it's important for me to know the communities rather than the stations, because when people ask, you know, does it hit this community or
Right.
this region, I don't know how that overlaps with
You
the
got it.
other communities, so.
Absolutely. We find ourselves in the same boat even sometimes.
Okay.
But yeah, just from an ease of putting it on the chart kind of thing, but I hear you
Okay.
loud and clear. This will be the picture then by the end of this fiscal year coming up in June of 24. Approximately 90,000 customers would have service available to them, about 2,000 miles of fiber. So as you heard John talk earlier, we got about 5,000 miles of conductor. We're kind of be about the same way on the fiber side. So we'll be about 45% complete. So we feel really good about that. The good news is, Andrew says, the bulk of the underground will be done as well too. So that impact that we're seeing where we're hitting other utilities or we're having customer issues in that regard, the bulk of that will be done by the end of June of 24. And we will begin work in that same time frame, that really towards the end of the fiscal year, to really start touching downtown proper as well too.
Jamie, what's our estimated take rate for that 90,000?
Again, we're shooting for that 35%. Now, again, what we've talked about with that delay is if you kind of feel that revenue curve, it's been delayed. So that uptake will have, so it's kind of shifted to the right, if you will. If you looked at our initial projection, it's shifting to the right a little bit, and ultimately we'll still crest up to our plans will be at that 35%. Is our goal.
Jamie, just to be very proactive, when you think about, because you talked about your lawn issues with customers, you just may want to take, when you get into Westmoreland and some of the other areas, take into account the Dogwood Trail.
Yeah.
Right, the pink line. I don't think you want to be digging anything, you know, during that time or even a month or two prior.
Especially since I'm on the board, Sherry Jenkins may kill me if I do.
Yes.
So that's right. Yeah, she knows where to find me.
Very true.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. No, absolutely. And part of our, you know, there's never been a good time to dig in these areas, and so it's just been a management. The good news is the problems are painful to us and personal to us. We don't like doing it. The good news is it has gone very well in many cases. I know Commissioner Simpson Brown commented on how well it went in her neighborhood. I know Mark recently had it at his house. Andrew and Jay are always quizzing people about how did it go. And so please, as you all don't ever feel as if you're passing along bad news. We really do want to know we can get better at this, and we will not get it right. I guarantee you today we're going to hit something or we're going to do something, you know, that we can do better. But we want to make it right. We can make it right in many cases. So, but this is the visual of where we will be at the end of 24. So as we talked about, you know, one of our goals in going forward with this was not only providing service, but supporting access for all of our customers. Real pleased to get finally launched. Our participation in the Federal Affordability Connectivity Program, you've heard us talk about ACP, that went live this past month. I think we've got a half a dozen folks already kind of converted into that were existing ACP customers with other providers or had become our customer and was waiting on this program to become available. So that's where you get $30 off of your internet bill. We submit application to the federal government to get that reimbursement back is kind of how that process works. Of note, this program is funded through FY24, but has not really got a full funding beyond that from the federal government. So we are keeping a close eye to see how that pans out legislatively at a federal level in that particular regard. Another way that we've supported access for all customers is the participation working with the Chamber on the eKnox pilot. If you recall, eKnox and the Chamber have had a long-standing effort, if you will, at the beginning of COVID to be sure that access was available for folks. This particular effort really hits on that goal of ours to be sure not only the access is there, but the usability and the understanding of how to use the internet as well too. So they have programs at 4 places and a 5th one that I understand completed literally this week at a place called Centro Hispano, if anybody's heard of that one. What? Yeah. It was, so at the end of the day, 39 students graduated from the ones held at Pond Gap, Cecil Webb, and at Knox Works, and I believe 10 graduated from the one at Centro this past week. In that regard, it was held at Belmorse Elementary School. Part of the graduation prize, if you will, is they receive a Chromebook at the end of the course completion. So not only, hopefully, we are supporting accessibility by our construction efforts, but also by participating with other community partners. This is a goal too, to be sure that people understand how to use it and can really, you know, capitalize on the investment that we're making as a community. So Nancy Neighbors and some of the folks over at the Chamber deserve a lot of credit. Amy Nolan for really keeping this going. I know they want this to be a sustained program here in Knoxville, and that's part of their goal going forward as well.
Jamie, it's also the only Spanish program, so it
Cool.
really helps parents understand how to interact with the school system and the online platforms there.
Yeah.
So it was a great first. We had great success with that first program.
No, I thought it was fantastic, and the stories coming out of it are just it's kind of what you wanted to have happen. It's really good stuff. Very similar programs with the Enterprise Center in Chattanooga. So there are models for this, and so we just want Knoxville to have something like this as well too. So we probably won't be the key player, but we definitely want to be a supporter in this space as well. And then lastly, ConnectEd, as you've heard and as you know, we wanted to be sure that as part of our launch, we had our student program, again, similar to our friends down in Chattanooga. The name of our program is ConnectEd, and we are now piloting. Tiffany and her team are working with our Teamwork students at Austin East, Central, and Fulton High Schools. We have a relationship with those kids, and this is a good way for them to help us kick the tires in that regard, and that is underway right now. Funding so far has been provided for the City of Knoxville. As you recall, the MOU that we established with them as part of us going live. That has been effective, and again, really appreciate Mayor Kincannon and City Council continuing to honor that commitment in that particular regard. And we plan to post this pilot with the Teamwork kids to expand into those schools for the 23-24 school year. The goal there would be is for the folks that sign up on this is that we make a commitment to kind of see them through high school, if you will, with this. So that's kind of the strategy behind seeing how we can stretch that funding to make that work. And as more funding is available, we'll expand to either more kids in those schools or even outside of those schools where we currently have service in that regard. So it's getting off the ground, and we're happy about that. So switching gears then to kind of how the competitive landscape is looking. We entered this business, we knew, and we've all discussed it was a competitive space, and we knew our competitors respond. Our friends at EPB had given us some ideas of how that was going to play out, and I won't say that they were fortune tellers, but they've been pretty correct. If you haven't received and been inundated with either door-to-door salesmen or flyers or television ads, then you've not been active. There's crazy deals being offered, and put some of these here on the screen in that particular regard. No contracts, those mysteriously disappeared. Higher speeds were being given away, whether customers can actually achieve those or not. Marketing spend in the Knoxville market has increased as well. As we interact with folks in this space, they've let us know that the minute KUB entered the market, that the marketing spend changed dramatically as well. Some of our competitors have upped their game in infrastructure as well too. As folks are getting their yards impacted, we're getting calls and saying, you're messing up my yard, and turn around, we look into it. It's not us, but it's our competitors doing work. And so you've seen them all over Knoxville as well. And in many cases, we're competing with them on the same streets for customers. All this to say, the competition has responded dramatically in our markets. We think that, again, research shows, and folks that have been in this space say that these good deals are not forever, that they'll be temporary. But we do think they're having an impact from contracts that they've been placed under, or at least promotional pricing. And I think that in some regards, as far as a conversion of these customers to us, it may just take time as these kind of efforts kind of wane out over the coming weeks and months. But
One of the biggest things I think we have going for us is our local call center.
Absolutely.
Because I think that is going to be the thing that separates us, is that someone or that knows your area will actually be responding to your.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about in a second the customer's response to our product and what we're seeing even in our research, but you're dead on. It really does differentiate us, absolutely. From just a pricing perspective, this was a slide that I used during the business plan phase. If you recall, I did get to put KUB in here in the place of EPB, where I had it before. When we started this out, Xfinity, you can kind of see and AT&T, our competitors, their prices, their speeds in that particular regard. If you fast forward to today, just as an example, just as a perspective, and what's interesting in this space too, what we hear from customers, and what we do think will set us apart too, Commissioner Herbert, is the consistency in this. Obviously, we hadn't changed this, don't plan to change it, and everybody gets the same deal. But what's interesting is speeds are being upped and given out, prices are being cut in all cases. We're still a really good value in the market in that particular regard. And so we don't feel the need to respond, and that's not really where folks are telling us we need to be. But there's also an inconsistency in pricing. At the same point in time, I've had neighbors who've been longtime customers with these folks that their prices are going up. And so we continue to hear a mismatch or a lack of transparency in the market. And so that transparency, that honest, fair dealer kind of approach is also what I think KUB will benefit us as well.
So there's two things here that I've seen, because I currently use one of these, is that when they saw my zip code and it was Knoxville, they automatically took $20 off of my internet, because they're like, oh, there's a special, and so that it makes the 55 even lower.
Yes.
And the other part is you have to call them up to be like, because they'll suddenly just up the price. And so you have to call or go in person to get them to lower the price again, which is just terrible customer service.
Yes.
So I think I'm really curious to see, I have a couple of friends that had KUB fiber in their neighborhood and they decided not to go with it. And I'll get you information on what that experience was for them.
Okay.
But I'm still wondering how we are marketing ourselves differently from the other companies. And because it's not in my neighborhood yet, I can't tell personally. But I definitely see a lot of marketing from all the other.
And one of the unfortunate things for us, and it's just where we're at too. And this reason we have to, the word on our team, at certain meetings is patience, because they know where we're going. Yeah. Because we're a governmental agency and we're transparent and we're fair dealers. I promise you, they have inundated the very areas the maps I've shown you before. And so it's a little bit of a disadvantage for us, but we think that consistency, that stay true to our message, true to our vision here, it's what KUB does. We think we win in the end. And I think that we'll be okay. We've just got to kind of stay the course. But when I say there's some crazy deals going on, there's some crazy deals going on. So, but I will say too, and I'll talk a little bit about customer feedback and our marketing too. Again, we're just getting off the ground with this, and the good news is our churn is pretty low. We're sitting, 1,600-ish customers, will say. And from time to time, we will hear say, well, it's not quite what I wanted, or it's not working the way I thought it would. If a customer will give us the opportunity to come and talk to them, we usually figure out what's going on. And again, we've learned in this process too, through installation and everything else, We've not gotten it right, but we've learned. And so it could be that some of our early adopters have again, they're onesies and twosies, and we kind of know their names. And we will take the time to call and say, why is it you're dropping service? Or what's going on? So we want that feedback as well too. So yes, any of that feedback is super.
Well, and I think another real advantage that we've got is, I mean, look up there, we're the only one, except for AT&T, and we're beating them on price, but the fact that we've got that download and upload
That's
speed.
right.
And I think that the number of people that are working from home, they need that
That's
upload
right.
speed. And the technical people that are working from home understand that. The non-technical may not.
Right.
So I'm just going to say that's something else that I think we need to really emphasize as we're marketing ourselves, and so that people understand what they're getting and what they're not getting. Because until you've tried to use it and you're stuck with either 5 megabyte or 15 megabyte, you don't realize that you don't have what you need.
Yeah, we
So-
continue to be, and I think we will always be Knoxville's only 100% fiber to the home. There's fiber to the home in places as being demonstrated, but it's not 100% fiber to the home. So
Jamie, a couple of questions. How many people are taking the TV side of this as well?
So we just launched, and I think right now we've got, I'll call dozens in that regard. What we heard, and kind of surprising, was that when you all get TV launched, I'll make the move. Maybe even some people in this room were that way, right? And so it's a real thing. Chris called me the other day and said that they had a conversation with an employee at the city, and it came up about fiber, and just happened to be that TV was live. And said, oh, your TV's live now? I'll call and place my order. And so we do think that there's still this notion that people want that triple play, which I would have told you that trend was declining, that people cut the cord and they're Netflix and Hulu and YouTube TV, but I think it's still ever present.
Yeah,
So-
I think it is, and I think it will be. I mean, listen, cord cutting is something I know is a trend that's going to continue. But I still think when you call Xfinity, you're expecting to get internet and TV together.
Yes.
You may not pick up the phone in the phone service, but at least you want that user guide. The user guide of the channel guide as well as the internet. So I think that's something as you think about the growth of this, I think I would imagine most customers, especially in some of the areas you've already launched in, want at least the double play, which is that program guide, as well as the internet service, because then it just becomes complicated for them to have. Here's my internet provider, but then I've got to have some kind of service, whether it's a Chrome stick or something like that. And most people just, as much as we read about in the press, most people aren't ready to embrace that quite yet if you're over the age of 35 years old.
Well, and I think that just the easy button too. I think your point about I place one phone call and just, here's what I've got, I need this tomorrow. And so we didn't think, for instance, that we might have a strong uptake on our in-home router service. That's very high. We didn't think that folks would I've told you our TV can run on a Fire Stick. We figured folks would buy their own or already have something. We're seeing a very high uptake on that. So I think there's been a couple things that kind of bucked our prediction, and I think TV uptake is going to be one of them as well. So I know we've got plans to really kind of highlight that. It's not the centerpiece of our deal, but in the areas in which we start to sense that that's a conversion issue, we're definitely going to hit that.
I mean, I would think the majority of people are going to want at least the program guide, the TV and the internet together.
Yeah.
That's going to be the focus of what most consumers are used to.
Yeah.
And you change that, and then you're going to just freak them out, and there's going to be all these questions, and how do I do this? It's going to raise customer service, probably calls. So just as y'all think about this, I think that double play, the TV and the internet almost becomes the standard way that you're going to sell this service, I would think.
Yeah, EPB would tell us that probably 80% of their customer service calls, technical support calls, are about the TV.
Yeah, and also I'll tell you something, and I haven't seen it yet. Maybe it'd be great to see it in one of your presentations. What the program guide looks like.
Okay.
It's so important to consumers what that program guide looks like, right? I mean, Comcast has, if they've done anything well, which they don't do much well, their program guide is superb.
Yes.
Right. Their voice technology is excellent. Their integration with Netflix and the apps within the universe is great. So if you have a bad program guide and you sell this, you're going to see your churn increase up because people are going to that's how they live and die by their program guide now.
That's right. No, I agree 1,000%. I will tell you, it is an excellent platform with X1 and Xfinity Guide in that regard. I think we've got a strong one, but I think that just like most of the streaming products, they're just not as good. And so I do think it is not as good, but I think it's good. And so we've got folks using it. I'm using it, and I've kind of converted to it, and I enjoy it. But I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, because it is literally how you live and breathe with your entertainment. I agree 1,000%.
I have a question on pricing, so
Yeah.
that goes along with that. So if I add TV and phone, am I still at $65? It's a different package?
No, the
So
TV
you're
package.
charging the packages also in addition to just the?
Yes. So we in order to gain access to TV and phone, you have to have internet, but you don't have to have all of it. So you can a la carte either one. We don't bundle and discount in that particular regard. So TV, 3 packages, gold, silver, bronze kind of thing, different tier levels, very competitive, very almost aligned exactly with Comcast TV. And as you do know, TV is just expensive. There is really nowhere to hide in the TV space from higher prices in that particular regard. So while we have long said our TV packages will probably be bearing a true market value price and will continue to increase over time, we feel like this is where we can hold serve and let customers make their choice about what they want to have in
You're
that space.
tracking this competitive pricing landscape against your competitors
Yes.
also, that for TV
Yes.
and phone
Absolutely.
and all of that? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Kind of tagging on what Cynthia just said, it would be great, maybe on a monthly or quarterly basis, to see metrics about your take rate, your churn, as well as your take rate on TV and the churn on there as well, just so we can kind of start to see some, how it's performing as you're growing the service.
Absolutely. Yep.
Somebody had asked me how many customers we had now, and I didn't know the answer to that question. And so that statistic itself might be a good talking point for us to have updated on a,
regular
monthly
basis.
basis. Maybe.
And again, because time has gone on so fast, where we are, we're still, a very, very young in the business. And so again, that's really not been our focus. It's been a very great interest, but as we've expanded to other areas, I think that'll become a more meaningful deal. As construction has been a little delayed and launching the product's been a little delayed, we're waiting for that time in which, okay, now that's when you want to really start paying attention to the growth in that particular regards.
Even now, to have it just from
Okay.
the standpoint of, because we're spending investment dollars, it'd
Right.
be nice to know how that ROI on those
Absolutely.
investment dollars are.
Absolutely.
And also it'd be great if you could share with us the pricing for the TV packages.
Okay.
As well. It'd be interesting to see. I know, for example, Spectrum has something now where you can choose 15 channels and that's it.
Yeah.
Right. And I know 2 people who have kind of converted to that in Farragut because they don't watch sports, right?
Right.
They can choose their 15, we all watch 10 channels probably, right? But we pay for 150. So it would just be interesting to understand the different options
Absolutely.
you're offering on the TV side
Yes.
and how it complements some of or how it compares to some of your competitors in the marketplace.
Yeah, the last time I think we reviewed that was, I guess it was last fall, and so we're probably due to bring that back as we finalize those packages and taking it live. Be glad to do that. Always love talking about it. We'll be glad to do that. So talking about our marketing efforts just a little bit, and kind of taking us down the home stretch a little bit. This is research that we've done with Tombras, just to let you know, really kind of as we want to say, well, where are we in the marketplace, and how are we doing? So this was a chart from the report. Unaided, meaning they didn't prompt the user in this scientific survey, over 400, a statistically significant survey, over 400 respondees. Unaided, they asked them questions. When thinking about internet providers, which company comes to mind first, and what other internet providers are you aware of? As you can see, the incumbents were on top of mind. They're bigger there in that regard. But even for, as they say, an offering in its infancy, reflective of a service that has established a presence across the region, KUB shows up in that unaided survey. So we take that as a good sign. Furthermore, if asked from an unaided perspective, the questions indicate which internet providers you would consider using in the future, and this could include your current provider. We obviously take up a much larger space, showing a great interest in that. While we take unaided, we take on a position equivalent or greater to the incumbent providers. We take this as continued validation about people's interest in KUB. And again, asked even more about how our awareness campaign is working. Respondees were presented then, aided, with a list of providers and asked a series of questions. Were they aware of the provider? How familiar are they with each provider? and finally, how likely they are to consider the provider for their future needs. As you can see by the graphic, over 2/3 of them were aware of KUB. Now, I will tell you, that might not have been the case 12 months ago. So we're glad, as far as the return on investment in our marketing and advertising and awareness campaigns, that were really, really widespread across our service territory. People know who we are. We need to continue to focus on the familiarity with us. They haven't necessarily taken the time to get to know the details, but when you look at the bottom funnel there, the consideration higher than any other provider, over 43% were definitely likely to consider us in the particular future. Now, the folks helping us understand this information says that is a rating that you would expect to see from a company that had been in the market about 10 years. So again, we think this is another seal of approval, if you will, that once we get to these customers, once they get from out and under contract, once they take that effort to convert, they're going to come to KUB in that particular regard. We really like this chart. So back to the notion about how we're highlighting the differences between KUB. Many of you all have probably seen our ads. We've talked about our first generation of those ads. You've seen the billboards and social media. Now we're about to hit the second wave of that, really focusing on the value proposition and what's different with customers. Again, it really highlights the differences. Speed continues to resonate with our customers. I think the local nature, and I think the fair dealer kind of notion is really out there as well too. And so this latest campaign that Jay and his team have worked on with Tombras really highlights the difference, really highlighting between us and the big guys in that particular regard. And so you may have already seen the first ad up top again, the speed deal. Are you really getting that gig versus you'll always get that gig from us and that speed? And then probably one of my favorite ones was, what's the difference between KUB and the big guys? And you can see all the fine print there on the left with the big guys, and then there's no fine print on ours as well too. And if you want to take the time to read that fine print, it's actually kind of entertaining there on that particular advertisement. But using this both in direct mail, social media, everywhere that we can place advertisements, and again, really targeting, you'll still see some widespread, but predominantly in the areas in which it's, to Commissioner Caballero's point, really in the areas in which it's available is really where we're hammering home and using our spend in that particular regard. All right, so switching gears to the financials. Again, the fiber budget is the focus here, but John mentioned earlier we have a direct relationship with electric, heavy on capital in the electric, a little lighter on the O&M. The flip is true in fiber, higher in O&M, and a little bit lighter in capital. Inflation has found us as well too in certain areas. We've had some winners and we've had some losers as far as our estimates when we went into this, but the news for this plan is this budget is consistent with what we've communicated to this board before. So we're still full steam ahead, still achieve our goals inside the budget for this particular fiscal year. On the electric side, again, part of John's budget is that $81.3 million there. Again, the lion's share of that's in network construction. You'll also see the smart switches that he talked about as well too. And then at a 35% take rate, $12.9 million in service, the actual service to the home in that particular regard. As I mentioned, additional 60,000 customers will be made available with our efforts this fiscal year 24. And we're still on track to have the fiber network fully completed by FY29 on that side of the house.
Hey, Jamie, I have to go back one.
Oh.
Can I go back one? Because
This one or another one?
more,
Got it.
actually, about the advertising. I just wanted to say one other thing in that, marketing is all from the eyes of the beholder, right? I mean, so you have to kind of take it all with a grain of salt. But, I think that something that Tombras can probably help you with, or you can help yourself, is to understand how your marketing message is going to be different for a 28-year-old versus a 55-year-old, right? If I threw this ad into Sequoia, they're not going to understand what it even means, right?
Okay.
So I think part of this is understanding how different demos are going to react to different messages as you're launching this in the marketplace. So something to consider.
And just to echo that, I don't know that I'm the demographic you're talking about. I think I'm an old millennial, but I am technically. I don't understand this graphic.
Okay.
Neither of them. Ninguno de los dos. I don't understand either of them. Maybe, we can talk about it in another moment. But I think when I'm thinking of my generation that's wanting to change, like, why do I want fast internet, right? this doesn't tell me that. And I'm working from home right now, and I still have Zoom meetings that I get kicked out of, and that's unacceptable, right?
Got it.
And so especially as the younger generations are doing this hybrid workplace more and more, how do we reflect that to the generation that's doing that? I think is interesting. I don't know that I care about the fine print, if I'm just speaking really
Sure.
honestly, and about the speed. That's not how yeah. So I think just echoing what Ron is talking about, I'd be curious to see what other options we have to connect with, and what if they've done focus groups for us, and how we respond would be really interesting.
Yeah, and all this is built upon the science of which messages and focuses have resonated.
Yeah.
And so, again, I think you're right on. What speaks to one group might not speak to another. And kind of out the gate, we're hitting the broad strokes of the ones that are resonating the most, because there's a lot of the messages that resonate with me that we're not using, that I said, Jay, we need to do this. And so we're kind of following the discipline of what the research shows, but at the same time, there's plenty of space to work in those
I'd be curious
notions.
to see the age segmentation as well, right? Like, how much of the population are we trying to attract that wants that's I don't know, over 65, and do they care as much about fast internet as, what's the percentage of younger people
Right.
that want fast internet for different reasons?
I will say this study had a really good split. It was very well represented, both folks that had our service and didn't, and also of an age demographic as well too. So again, but very well received feedback. I agree 1,000%, because I think there are some really strong notions that we're kind of holding in reserve that I think once this kind of plays its way out, then I think it's some of those that indeed, well, we need to emphasis on. But love the feedback. So back to the financials, and don't ever hesitate to ask the questions if we have to move backward in that regard. On the fiber division proper, again, heavy on the O&M side, a little lighter on the capital. O&M, I'll point out to you the list here again, really highlights the emphasis on labor, and then those fees that you're familiar with that we pay back to the electric division for access and utilization of the fiber network. For fiscal year 24, that'll almost be $5 million that fiber will pay back to electric. And then labor of almost $3.6 million in that particular regard as well too. Labor, warehousing, IT, those things that you would expect to see from a startup company in this particular regard. We've got about 80 employees right now. We'll hire about another 30 this year in different areas as we continue to grow the division in that regard. Question on the fiber financials. So I'll kind of end where I began. It's been a big year. It's been a great year. Again, we are making a difference in our community. Different pictures here kind of represent those relationships that we're building. Folks that have the service really love it. Our reliability on the network is really high in that particular regard. I'll point out very briefly again, literally a letter that we got just here recently. If it's from somebody that definitely is in a different demographic than we've talked about today. It was a handwritten letter, which I challenged Comcast and Xfinity to get a positive handwritten letter. This is from an 82-year-old person over on Woodbine Avenue, and I had to use somebody that could read his writing. I've got a good translation. I just want to touch on a couple excerpts here. It said, I had the pleasure of getting KUB fiber on March the 25th. Your tech, Hayden, did the job. He is very efficient and does his job well. He helped me unhook my Xfinity boxes. When he left, all 3 TVs were working well, but I forgot to check my PC. If Xfinity was not connected, it would not log on to the internet. I was going to call today, but Sam and John came back to check on the work done by Hayden. They fixed the issue with the extender in my front room, and my PC is too far away. It took a long time to the PC to connect because it's 13 years old. I know I'll be happy with KUB fiber. Everyone I talked to or had in-house were very professional. It has been a pleasure so far. We'll tell my neighbors it will be cheaper and better with KUB. I'm 82 years old and not computer savvy. And so what has been a joy in the fiber space is to continue to make our customers happy like we do every day with our other 4 divisions. I do think it's a distinct advantage. It's been great. Our biggest joy, the folks working on this, is making our customers happy, just again like our other 4 divisions. We think we'll continue that success in the days ahead as we continue to expand our service. So a lot of great questions, a lot of great feedback, but obviously able to answer any more if you have them.
Is that a drum roll I hear?
Here we go. Commissioners, I know we're approaching close to lunchtime, so I'll try and go as quickly as I can with the review of the proposed budget and bringing all the numbers together and looking at it on a consolidated basis and also by utility division, but also in part because I'll be back in May to even give a more detailed presentation on the budget and funding of the budget. So I know you'll look forward to that too. But some of these items we've already touched upon, but the total proposed budget on a consolidated basis for all five divisions combined is $1.2 billion. That does represent an increase of $73 million over our current year core forecast for cash expenditures. The big drivers there, we've touched upon. O&M is up $20 million compared to the current year forecast. Inflationary pressures in a number of areas are driving that. Staffing will also be up, as we've already mentioned. So a number of factors driving that. But inflation across many of the items we've already talked about today is also a big driver in that. Capital is also up $65 million. But you may recall last month when we gave an update on the current year budget that we had a lot of timing issues and capital was projected to be down $60 million. So a lot of that is just that timing shift. Now there's inflationary pressures in capital. We've mitigated some of that by what John and Kurt talked about in pulling back on some of our Century 2 investments as well. So speaking of the capital budget, it's $284 million total. $135 million of that is for our Century 2 infrastructure investments, which is pipe replacement, substations, transformers, the items that we talked about earlier, of course. And then $81 million for the fiber infrastructure, which includes the network, services to the home, smart switches, and some other items also. To help fund that $284 million capital budget, we are proposing the issuance of $85 million in new bonds, long-term revenue bonds, and that would be $55 million for electric, $20 million for water, and $10 million for wastewater for the upcoming fiscal year. And although no board action is required, just as a reminder, we do have 3 rate increases going into effect in the upcoming fiscal year that have been previously adopted by the board. I know Gabe touched upon this, but just as a quick reminder that for water it's 5%, wastewater is 4%. Those increases, as far as the average residential customer's monthly bill, water will add about $1.50 to that average bill. For wastewater, add about $2.70 to the average bill. And those go into effect this summer. We've reflected on bills in August. And then towards the latter end of the fiscal year, the last of the 3% electric rate increases the board previously adopted will go into effect in April. That adds about $3.60 to the average residential bill.
So we're about $7.
It's about $8 total if you add all 3 up. Correct. So looking at the budget in total, consolidated basis, but also broken down by utility division, I'll touch on this fairly quickly. $1.2 billion total. If you look at it by utility division, electric $773 million, fiber's $30 million, gas $153, water $111, wastewater $132 million. Looking at it another way, by the major cost components, wholesale energy, as is always the case, is the biggest single component because we'll pay a lot to TVA, we'll pay a lot to our gas suppliers and for the pipelines to transport the gas. In total, that's $554 million. You'll notice we also put on that same line item, really to make the chart a little easier to read, the fiber cost of goods sold, which is $6 million. Now, that's obviously not energy, but it is also a flow through to our customers, just like wholesale energy costs are. The total O&M budget is $213 million. Again, the total capital budget's $284 million. Debt service, which is principal and interest we'll pay on our outstanding bonds. We have about $1.1 billion in total outstanding bonds. That's $95 million for FY24. About $49 million of that is principal payments, actually reducing the amount of outstanding debt. $46 million is interest payments on the outstanding bonds. And then in lieu of tax payments and federal payroll taxes that we remit to the government on behalf of our employees, that's about $44 million total. $36 million of that is for in lieu of tax payments. And we're looking, if you break that down, about $23 million to the city, $10 million to Knox County, and $1 million to the other jurisdictions combined. And then, last but not least, the electric division has $9 million to be budgeted to loan to the fiber division to continue to help fund the startup of fiber operations. And you may recall we have previously discussed that with the delay that we had in this current fiscal year for fiber, that the electric division was going to be loaning more money to the fiber division than we originally anticipated. That's about $20 million in total. About $4 million of that incremental $20 million is reflected in the $9 million. In other words, if we were looking at this last year, we'd say that was going to be $5 million for FY24. It's now $9 million.
With that loan, no, initially with our loan to fiber, we had to go through TVA.
Yes.
To get TVA approval.
And we're going through that process right now for that additional $20 million, and we hope to hear something very shortly on that. We anticipate it will be approved. So looking a little more closely at the $73 million increase over the current fiscal year forecast, wholesale energy, good news on that for our customers is natural gas prices have actually been falling over the last several months. And if natural gas prices fall, because so much natural gas is now used in electric generation, electric prices will also fall. So we're seeing that shows $11 million. It's actually probably more than that because fiber cost of goods sold is actually going to go up as we'd have more customers. So we're probably looking around $16 million actual decrease in wholesale energy on that. O&M is up $20 million. Again, we could go through the components. Labor is about $6 million of that. I think we're projected to add about 70 to 80 staffing positions next fiscal year, and we are well under our staffing plan for the current fiscal year. I guess about maybe 80 positions at this point in time. So you're looking at just sort of the timing of the hiring is impacting and showing in that variance.
Since you mentioned hiring, Mark, I just want to say I applaud what we've been doing in terms of making sure that we reached out to all of our communities, and I would encourage us to continue to do that.
Sure.
So that our workforce looks more like our communities that we serve.
Exactly.
And so I want to just give a kudos to the team who's been doing that work and just say keep it up.
Yeah, that's a big focus of HR and also a part of our DEI initiative as well. So that's, again, looking at capital compared to the current year forecast, up $65 million. There's some inflation embedded in there, but most of that is timing. There's always a lot of puts and takes on capital. Our debt service budget is up about $7 million over the current year forecast. That really ties back to the $85 million in new bonds because there will be interest and some principal repayment on those bonds. Often depends upon the time of the issuance, though.
Mark, one question about the bonds.
Mm-hmm.
Are these bonds structured so that if interest rates change, that we will have the ability, let's say in 5 years, to do a refi or whatever we did with a bunch of our other debt several years ago? Yes,
typically we will put in we always have call provisions in the bonds that will give us an opportunity to call or refinance. And it's typically ranges anywhere from 8 years to 10 years.
Okay.
If you go in and try and do a call, say, well, we want to call in 3 to 5 years, well, that gets the attention of the investors, and that's going to impact the rates that you get on that if they think that you could call those in such a short period of time. But yes, we will have call provisions, always do.
Okay.
And then taxes and equivalents in total, up $4 million. Most of that is in lieu of tax payments, just because of the continued investments in our utility system infrastructure. And then on the last piece is actually a decrease of $11 million. This year, electric loan fiber, $20 million. Next year, it'll be $9 million. So you just have that decrease of $11 million. And that nets out to the $73 million increase. Okay. Some of the key financial indicators that are the result of our budget, result of our planned projected revenues and expenditures. And really what I wanted to demonstrate here is that each of the divisions will continue to be financially sound over the course and by the end of next fiscal year. At the very top, you see an assumption. It's not so much an indicator, but an assumption of what we've built into our budget for our projected interest rate that we will get on the $85 million in bonds, and that is 5%. I think, several months ago, it was something less than that, but myself and my staff, we talked about this and we felt that no, the Feds continue to take some actions, so we bumped that up to 5%. We discussed that with our financial advisor, Cumberland Securities, who helps us with all our bond work, and they said, yes, we believe that's a reasonable rate. Now, that is taken into consideration. We anticipate the Fed to take further actions, even though inflation has begun to cool somewhat on an annualized basis. We do anticipate there will be some additional actions. To the extent that that cooling changes course and the Fed becomes more aggressive than really what the market's anticipating, then it could be greater than 5%. Obviously, nothing's certain in that regard. Looking at our outstanding debt, you can see the projected levels at the end of next fiscal year for each of the systems. Electric and wastewater are the highest, both over $400 million. I'll point out that wastewater has been coming down, will continue to come down over time as we've talked to the board about. Importantly, they're all in line with our target ranges for the system's debt funded ratio. So that's obviously very important. And we've set that previously in conjunction with the board, talked to the rating agencies about that as well. That those are targets. We'd like to be at that or less over time. And you can see we are. Debt coverage, I know sometimes that can maybe be confusing, but basically that's a good measure of financial strength of a company. How many times can you repay your maximum principal and interest over the life of the bonds? And it's something we pay a lot of attention to. We have target levels for that are really set in order to be able to retain a high quality bond rating. And you can see on all of those levels what we're projecting is to be quite a bit above what those targets are for all the systems. So that is a good thing. The higher, the better. That. And then our ending cash. We'll end the year with solid cash positions. We do have target balances for each of our utility divisions. And of course, you can see they vary a lot. Electric's going to be a lot higher than the other systems just because there's a higher level of spend over the course of the month. But we are projected to be above or right at our target balances, with the exception of wastewater, which is about $6 million higher. And that's because we're doing a $10 million bond issue in wastewater this year. Some of that will reside in cash as it carries over to next fiscal year because we don't plan to issue any debt for wastewater next fiscal year. Part of that is having to carve it up so small and what the market would take on and look at it. So we're going with the $10 million issue this year. So one thing I'll point out, if we were, and we may have talked about this last month, but if we were looking at what we're projecting these levels to be for the current fiscal year, they're all well above those ending cash targets. So when we look at how each budget is going to be funded for FY24, you're going to see in the pie chart, every division has a slice of the pie of general fund cash. And a lot of that is tied to the timing of capital that we didn't spend for the current fiscal year. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, next 5 slides. A lot more numbers, but I'll touch upon them quickly. Basically, it's showing each division's budget and how the budget will be funded. We'll begin with electric, a $773 million total budget. Again, what we pay TVA, $471 million, is the biggest share, the lion's share of that budget. But we also have a $150 million capital program, and John touched upon many of the factors in that budget. $44 million of that is for various Century 2 investments. $81 million for the fiber infrastructure, really drive the electric capital budget next year. O&M's $86 million. Vegetation management's $15 million of that. And there are a lot of other system maintenance components as well that make up that budget. Debt service on electric, that has been creeping up over time as we've added more debt, as we begin to build out the fiber network. That's $34 million of the total budget. And again, that's a combination of principal and interest on that $400 million plus in outstanding bonds. Okay. And then taxes and equivalents, $23 million. Then you see the $9 million loan to the fiber division. So how will that budget be funded? There's really four pieces of the pie. You see one that's very large, which you would expect to see, that it's mostly funded by projected electric system revenues for the upcoming fiscal year, just under $690 million. You have the $55 million new bond issue. You can also see $24 million in general fund cash. So what we're projecting, we have that target of $45 million. We're projecting around $69 million to end the current fiscal year. So you see where that comes into play there. And then also, it's a very small piece of the pie, but it's very important, grants. Jamie mentioned the $15.3 million in broadband grants we received. We actually are going to start work in some of those rural areas in FY24, so we're anticipating a reimbursement of $5 million to round out the funding of the budget. Gas is $153 million. Again, purchase gas cost, wholesale gas cost, $78 million, makes up the biggest share of that. Our gas capital program's $29 million. That's a lot of growth-oriented expenditures, but also steel main replacement and some other Century 2 related investments for the gas system. The debt service budget, or I guess the O&M budget's next at $28 million. Debt service budget's relatively low compared to the others at $9 million, because you remember we only had like $70 million in outstanding bonds, and part of our current long-term funding strategy for gas is to drive that debt down some each year. And then $9 million in combination of federal payroll taxes and in lieu of tax payments. Funding for the gas budget, mostly system revenues, $145 million, and then $8 million in general fund cash will fund the budget. Yes?
General fund cash mean again?
That's like your working capital cash. It's like what our main bank account is. That's what we pay our operating and capital expenditures out of. Looking at the water budget at $111 million, $55 million is for capital investment. As Kurt mentioned, $33 million of that is for the MBW filter project. So that's a big share of our, almost 60% of our total water capital budget next fiscal year. O&M expenses are $36 million. Various maintenance programs for our water system make that up. Debt service is $15 million on our outstanding debt. And then in lieu of tax payments and taxes are $5 million. That budget will be funded. You see several pieces of the pie there. The majority, again, water system revenues projected to be $73 million for the upcoming fiscal year. You have the $20 million new bond issue. Here you see a little bit bigger piece of the pie on grants is $10 million. And that is what we are anticipating to receive from the city and or county. And that is going to help fund the filter project. And then you see $8 million in general fund cash to round out that budget. Wastewater at $132 million. Again, the biggest piece, capital at $47 million, O&M at $45 million. Kurt talked about really what makes up that $47 million and $45 million budget. You'll notice on debt service, that's a pretty big piece. It's the same as electric, but the budget's much smaller. So 25% of the wastewater budget is paying principal and interest on outstanding debt, because we have $460 million plus in outstanding bonds for wastewater. In lieu of tax payments, taxes, $7 million. The funding, mostly system revenues, $113 million in projected revenues next year, $10 million new bond issue, and then $9 million would be drawn from general fund cash. And then the fiber budget sort of pales in comparison to the others. $30 million in total. You can see the components of, most of that is O&M. You do see $3 million in repayment of principal and interest to the electric division for the loans that the electric division has made. $6 million for cost of goods sold. And then also as a benefit to the electric division, Jamie mentioned the utilization and system access fees that fiber pays the electric for using electric system assets to be able to provide the fiber services. And that number will grow over time as years go by, as we add more customers to fiber. And then the funding, $15 million is what we're projected in fiber customer revenues next year. You have the $9 million and the loan from the electric division, and then you also have $5 million or $6 million in general fund cash to round out the funding of the $30 million budget.
Are we not projecting grants in fiber in the next coming years?
The grants go to pay for the electric side.
Yes, because the fiber network and the fiber services are on the electric side. So,
that reflects in the first one.
yeah, if you go back to electric, even though it's
grants, the $5
hard to
million.
see, but that $5 million of that 15 is there.
Thank you.
Okay. So taking us to next month's board meeting. You may recall last month we talked about, because of rising, I guess, first item that we'll bring for your consideration is to amend the current budget, FY23 budget appropriations. When we did our review last month, we noted because of wholesale energy prices really skyrocketing for the first part of the year, that we were going to be over budget for both electric and the gas divisions. So first item of business is to request the board approve additional budget appropriations for those two divisions. Right now, we're thinking electric is probably going to be in the range of $45 million, and gas will be around $15 million to cover that. Now, as part of that, we have to demonstrate that we have the funding for those additional appropriations, which we do, because we talked about also how far electric revenues were up over budget and gas revenues up over budget too. So the funding is there to do that, but we'll talk about that next month as well. Then we'll transition on. Did you have a question, Ty?
I think we can talk about it later. So the money's there, but we still need action from this board to approve
Yes, you
it,
do,
but it's still
because
there.
by
Okay.
city charter, we need an appropriation approved by the board to spend money out the door, or even to commit for the money to be spent out the door. So that's even though the money's there
There, okay.
to pay for it, we still need the budget to be amended.
Okay.
Yes. And then we will talk about a deeper dive into the FY24 budget, and then request the board approve appropriations for all 5 divisions for FY24. And then we'll also talk about commitment appropriations. And just as a reminder, Bill Coley's smiling because he loves that. And basically, we need an appropriation to not only to spend cash out the door FY24, but to the extent we're in projects that commit us to spend cash beyond June 30th of 24, we need an appropriation to cover that as well per the city charter. So that's what that is. And then we'll have a resolution requesting the authorization to approve the bonds, the not to exceed $85 million as well, and requesting city council approval on that. So those are the official action items we'll have in May. So you'll see a lot more of me next month. Well, okay, somebody else can do it. That's fine. That's fine. I know you miss me though. So to bring us back to sort of where we started this morning, we do have a lot of challenges before us. Inflation has had, as has been demonstrated, I think, in almost every presentation, a significant impact on our operating costs and to some extent on our capital cost as well. When we did update our long-range plans for this year, O&M costs were up $200 million compared to last year. That's over a 10-year period, and you saw the $20 million for FY24, but you spread that over the whole plan. And there's other impacts and things to help offset inflation on capital. We've pulled back on some of our system investments from even when we've pulled back previously on that. So the inflation response plan that we're going to be developing over the course of the next 6 months will take all those factors into consideration. And you can see the major components of there, and that we'll look at all our operating and capital programs and see what is sustainable. I think we are somewhat concerned about the level of asset replacement that's in our current long-range plans, and that may need to increase. You do that, though, that puts more financial pressure on the plans. So we'll also be looking at programs that maybe we can reduce or slow down on as part of the exercise, and look at potentially new revenue opportunities as well. But then we'll have to look at our funding strategies, from looking at rates and looking at debt. do we need to pivot? Do we need to make modifications in what our previous projections have been for both rate increases and the use of debt? And that'll all be part of that discussion. To a large extent, we've faced this challenge before. You know, we go back to the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, when we took a pause on Century 2 and went back to historical levels of capital investment for a couple of years before we resumed as conditions improved back in the fall of 2011. And then the pandemic. The pandemic brought a host of challenges itself, and which many are still with us, the legacy of the pandemic, I guess we call it, where we made adjustments for that, and we didn't have rate increases for that, and we pulled back on capital investment to be able to accommodate. Some of that was done sort of for us because of supply chain constraints that we had in some of our programs as well. But I guess the point is we've been through this before, even in the current fiscal year budget, you know, because inflation was this time last year, we were seeing significant inflation. So we had to factor that into our FY23 budget. So we've been down the path before, but really the key point is that we believe this is different. And the pandemic is leaving, I think, a lasting legacy with us. Some of that may moderate over time, but for instance, inflation. For many of the areas of cost, including labor and many other items too, contractors, really a new baseline has been set, and we don't expect that to go down. Now, we hope that the growth rate of that new baseline will temper over time, and we're starting to see some of that. We don't want to have 9% annualized inflation every year, or the plans blow up, essentially. And hopefully that will not happen. But a new baseline has been established. That $200 million that I referenced, that's really a new baseline for the most part. And we have to figure out a way to manage that. I think also you look at the labor market, you know, the great resignation, I guess is what it's called, and shortages of labor, which help drive wage inflation and help drive supply chain constraints as well. There's not enough people out there to fill the jobs. You know, the demand is still there, but the supply is not. And that puts upward pressure on prices, as we know. So we are going to basically we've already started the process of dividing into work groups for this inflation response plan. And all of executive staff is involved, managers will be involved and all. So we sort of all have assignments, and we're going to begin coming together over the course of the summer. And the idea is to culminate with a workshop with the board in November, which will be much like what we've done today. Maybe need to be a little bit longer, I don't know, where we'll look at alternatives, options for managing the impact of the inflation. And to some extent, we say everything is on the table. We'll look for new revenue opportunities. Part of it is we're going to assess our revenue projections that are in our plans right now. Are they too conservative? Maybe so, and that would help somewhat. I know you always like to be conservative in your revenue projections, but you don't want to do so to an extent that it's a detriment and that you're using other funding mechanisms when you may not have to. So that's part of it. And then just taking that gut look at a lot of our programs, in particular our Century 2 programs, to see, do we need to increase? Do we need to get back to what we believe is a more sustainable rate of replacement? So I'm rambling on, but all that goes into that. We do anticipate coming back to the board. We may have more than one workshop. We'll just see how it goes. But then the end result would be some type of revised long-range plan that we would present to the board about this time next year on that. But a lot of work needs to be done along the way. And ultimately, there'll be a lot of maybe some tough and critical decisions to be made in conjunction, obviously, with you all.
As you take on, as you face these headwinds this year and next year, probably other years after that, any risk in the rating agencies adjusting KUB's rating, downgrading?
I don't anticipate that. If anything, I think it depends, you know. If we were to somehow cut back on rate increases and greater levels of debt, and the ratios that we saw in coverage levels started to change significantly, then yeah, that could have downward pressure. But again, everything in balance, and I don't anticipate we would do that. If anything, I would say on the wastewater side, we continue to push hard to get that thing to a AAA rating, and we will continue to press on that. So really, I guess to answer your question, Ron, no, I don't see that happening. Okay.
Well, we as board members really appreciate the time that you guys put into this presentation, because I know that it's very time consuming to whittle this much information into this period of time, and we always are continually amazed at the great staff that we have. And you know, even Mark over the past 10 years has schooled me in math. We joke about it, that I actually understand things 10 times better than I did when I came on this board. So I've had a master class in finance from Mark Walker.
Mission accomplished.
But
Took 10 years, Mark.
it wasn't quick. I'm a slow learner.
That was not a reflection on Mark.
But really, we appreciate y'all so much.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, I want to close it out and say thank you for the questions always. And if there's others that you think of, please let us know. We're here to serve and to answer the questions, because ultimately there are things we're constantly thinking about. But from your lens, it always helps give us a different perspective. And I wanted to say some thanks to some folks. Celeste, you kind of started off with the thanks to the staff, because they do all the heavy lifting. Our budget team, headed up by Chris Hood and Brian Day, do a great job with that. But the folks in there are Rick Jackson, Rebecca Dameron, Garrett Metz. On the fiber side, it's Melissa Reynolds and Haley Tucker, who really put all that data together. Like you said, it looks nice and it's great, but it takes a lot of effort for those folks to do it. I want to thank our communications team, Courtney Harris and Cameron Rowlett. They do all the slides, production, TV, all the live streaming. They're doing all that behind the scenes and make it look great. I'll say thank you for that. I want to thank Debbie in the back. She never wants credit, but I give it to her all the time for making this thing just easy and does a great job. Liz Hannah, where's Liz? Liz over there, she does a great job also. They take a lot of pride in making sure this is as flawless as possible and it's set up as well as it can be. So I want to say thank you for that. And I also want to make a note that next Wednesday is Mark Walker's 30th anniversary at KUB. 30 years of service. This is his 23rd budget presentation. So 23 years of doing this. So he's definitely got it down pat, and it teaches me things all the time about finance also. So I'm learning also. But I do appreciate that. I want to say thank you to those folks, and personally want to say what a great staff and folks we have at KUB. We're blessed to have attracted those folks and keep them on, and they're teaching us things every day about how to do things a little differently, even beyond that. So I want to say thank you again, and hope to see you all. We'll see you next month for sure.
Thank you, Gabe, and we echo Celeste's sentiments to the team, so pass our thanks and gratitude along to them. We will stand adjourned. Commissioners, we do have box lunches for you. You can either stay and have those or grab them with you, and it will be an open work session for the public to attend. So we stand adjourned.